Welcome to the Business Advice Podcast, where we discuss marketing, money, and other matters with businessmen around Australia.
G'day, Jed.
How
How
you
are
going? Good.
So you're in Brisbane at the moment?
I am currently, yes.
Okay, but you hail from the Northern Territory, from Darwin?
Yes.
Okay. So you come down for some really cool weather, hey?
Yeah, a bit cloudy. It's very reminiscent of Darwin wet season, so it's same. It's a little bit cooler here, but yeah, that's really it. Just a little bit cooler.
Okay, yep. And so the reason we're talking tonight, you're a candidate for the Senate for
Yes.
Libertarian Party of Australia.
Yes.
Coming up in the election coming up soon. Yeah, so we're very keen to hear a bit about your journey and then what led you to getting into politics and why the Libertarian Party and what the Libertarian Party has to offer specifically for our members in business advice for
Sure.
men in business. What are the policies that might benefit men in business and Australians in general? So
Okay.
really keen to hear this. And also, like, I'm going to get this wrong, but you have a background in business?
I do have a diploma in small business management. I got that 20 years ago. I ventured into I'll get to this after I speak about a bit more of my background.
Yeah, fantastic. So where did it all start? Were you born in Darwin or how?
No, I was born in Melbourne, but shortly after I was born, my parents moved up to Brisbane, and then about a year and a half later, my father and mum moved to the Northern Territory. My dad got a job in the NT Police Force. So I was actually raised in the communities. I spent all my formative years in Aboriginal communities and outstations until I was a teenager, and I moved to Darwin to attend high school.
Right. Okay. Fascinating. What a childhood.
Yeah, well, I feel like I was very privileged in the sense that I got to live sort of between Darwin and the communities. I spent most of my time in the communities. During that time, whilst there were problems in the communities, they paled in comparison to the problems that exist now.
Really? So you've
Oh
seen
yeah.
it is now worse than what it was 10, 20 years ago.
30 years ago, yes. It's like I was in the communities from between 87 to 96. And then I went back to the communities throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, and I've seen them gradually get worse. Some
Really?
communities are a standout. There are a few communities in East Arnhem Land, Groote Island, that have gotten better, but they are in the minority.
Interesting. And so your old man was with like in NT Police?
Yes.
Okay. And he's got a business that sort of merged, like connected with that, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so when we were stationed in Catherine and out in Arnhem Land, this is through the East, my dad was very actively involved in firearms training, firearms coursing, and armory. And my dad got a whole bunch of qualifications in firearms manufacturing, repairing, went to the United States for the NT Police Force to maintain their armory. And eventually, when we relocated to Darwin, when I was a teenager, my father took over the armory and he was the officer in charge of the training college. So all new recruits, my dad was the top dog.
Okay. The OIC. Okay. All right. So that's, wow, what a job. So he's gone from that and he started a business in supply or repair, manufacture, something.
Yeah, so he's always maintained a private interest in firearms repair, manufacture, whatnot, in conjunction with his work in the police force. Now, obviously, this is all above board. He has an armourer's license, he has qualifications, permission by the NT Police Force, and then when he fully retired in about 10, 12 years ago, he kicked off a side hustle, I guess you could say. He never really wanted to turn it into a big business because it's just something he's always been passionate about. And then about 9 years ago, I was doing other things. And then Dad basically said to me, hey, look, I'm growing the business. It was actually, I think, more of a push from my mother. She
Right.
really pushed it because we took on so much work. It was the fact that there was gaps in the market. One of the main civilian repairers in Darwin, he closed up shop, and because he was friends with my father, it was sort of like he turned over all his business goings-ons to my dad, and it sort of just blew from there.
Right. Okay. And so the scope of that, so client was the police, and then there were other
Yes.
clients as well, and outside of firearms.
Yeah, so when my dad retired, there was nobody to really take over the armory in the NT Police Force. It was turned over to somebody else, but they didn't have the skill set that my father had built up over the previous 30 years. And so what happened was a lot of the work that armory was in charge of doing ended up going back to my dad as a outside operator to do that work.
Okay. So as a private contractor,
Kind of, yeah.
post. Yep. Fascinating. Fascinating. And then you mentioned there was, so it started with the firearms, but there was also a marine application and various other applications for the type of work that you guys were doing.
So because the work that we do is a lot of bespoke manufacturing, CNC kind of work, there's also my side of it because I come from a chemical engineering background. There's elements of like protective coatings,
Sure.
corrosion management. So I had a fairly good skill set in material engineering, specifically fighting corrosion. And when you sort of tie that in with what the NT is like, the weather, the humidity, the applications are sort of
Sure.
anything that's metal, anything that can rust or corrode or fail or deteriorate, that's where sort of I fall in. So
Yeah.
I came on board to, initially I started with just firearms and then we sort of branched off and I took on a whole bunch of work in marine, aviation, a lot of the mining and construction in heavy industry because they had very unusual requirements. You can't just paint something and say, yeah, she's all good. Sometimes you need a bit of a more of a unique solution.
Fascinating. Okay. So you did that for quite a few
10
years.
years. 10 years.
Okay. Excellent. All right. And so you've got a background in business, and at some point, tell us about the journey into politics.
Oh, hell. Okay. My family has always been pretty rigorous around the dinner table when it comes to political and religious type discussions. It was never something that was a taboo subject. I had a lot of friends who
Politics
said,
and religion.
yeah, oh yeah. It's actually really hilarious because even though my dad spent 30 years in the police force and firearms and everything along those lines, his actual first degree was a bachelor in theology.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So he had a religious background, which was a bit unusual when it came to, and unfortunately, politics has got that wonderful thing where it merges religion and politics sort of go hand in hand a lot of the time. So,
Or anti-religion. Or,
well, it can go either way, but
yeah.
what we found is when you'd always watch the news was always on every night. There was never any skipping that, and discussions around local politics, national and international, was always something that was widely discussed, and that was across political ideologies from left to right. So communism, capitalism, that was always on the table. The differences between Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and the various Asian styles of religion, Buddhism and Shintoism, and so on and so forth. And the debates around the dinner table and then ongoing were always very active. So my parents always wanted to see that in myself and my brothers, that we were very aware of what was around us.
Interesting. What a
Yeah.
fascinating life growing up, like with that combination.
I feel very lucky. I know a lot of guys I went to high school with who were, it was like they were walking through life with blinders,
Right.
completely unaware. I was amazed when I moved from regional Australia into Darwin and I went to high school and people who'd only ever lived in Darwin felt were, I hate to say it, I thought they were idiots. Most of the people I went to high school with in grade 8 I thought were morons because they hadn't the education and I was shocked. I was like, you guys have got all the benefits here through your formative years, and you guys are half-wits. I couldn't believe it.
Fascinating. Okay. Yeah, and I guess so because of being sheltered, from all the different ideas out in the world, or just unaware. Um,
I don't know. I think it just depends on your upbringing, and this is the old nature nurture debate. My parents were never shy about exposing me to things that were abhorrent or horrible. Like I have friends who in high school their parents would only let them watch Disney G-rated cartoons. They wouldn't let them see through the 90s you had the Georgia War in near Russia. You had the Bosnian Serb conflict, and my parents would you'd have it on the news, you'd see it, we would discuss it, would go through it. So I was fully aware of this going into high school, but then I had people that are around me who were 15, 16, 17 years old who had never watched a PG movie.
yeah,
And I was
right.
like, holy crap, these people don't even. So the old nanny state sheltered, cover your kid with bubble wrap was something that was never done with me because living in the communities, you would see some pretty horrible stuff in the indigenous communities of Northern Territory. So you'd see alcoholism, you'd see child abuse, you'd see murder, rape, you'd see Land Cruisers rolled over with kids thrown from the Land Cruiser dead on the side of the road. You'd see that stuff.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
So I definitely did not have a sheltered upbringing.
Okay. I guess something like growing up in a third world country or something like that. I know friends who grew up in various war-torn countries or whatever,
Yep.
and they share the same sort of stories. Interesting. So then, where did you start politically?
I actually started probably 12, 13. So when I moved to Darwin, I think grade 8, I got involved in youth parliament. I got involved in the student representative councils, so the round tables. I got
Mhm.
involved with the debate club, and that was from grade 8 onwards.
Okay.
So I was very active in that space.
So your whole life. So this is
Yeah.
very young. And then what did you start off conservative, or has your political ideas, beliefs changed significantly, or in some ways? I mean,
Well, it's funny actually. I look back from 13 to now, so that's 27 years. I guess I've always been a conservative or always conservative leaning. Some of my social policies personally fit very middle of the road because there are elements like I'll give an example. There are some very hardcore libertarians or conservatives out there that want to see a complete defunding of Department of Education or complete removal of government oversight of education.
interesting.
But there can be
So this would be more anarchism as opposed to libertarianism.
no is essentially no government controls over education other than
Oh,
setting a standard and allowing private institutions to
sure.
run education. And obviously,
So the
you
individual family would have more money because they're paying less tax, but then they would, as an individual family, they would make a decision to go to a Catholic school or.
correct. And essentially, when you look at the way that say the United States operates, they've got public schools, they've got private schools, and then they've got the charter schools. And essentially, the charter schools are independently run private organisations. The
Mhm.
public schools are under the Department of Education, and then you've got the private organisations that follow the standards set by the Department of Education, but in a private model.
Okay. Interesting. But some libertarians have that, but that's not a formal assertion from the Libertarian Party.
No, it's not. There are different policies you can enact to ensure better quality outcomes, but I think in general in Australia, the public education system is mostly pretty good because I went through public education and my school was fantastic. So I went to Darwin High School and I thought as a public school, I thought that school was amazing. Now,
Interesting.
it just depends on a number of factors. Unfortunately, what we've seen over the last maybe 10 or 15 years in the public education space is that the vicious radicalized left have infiltrated the schools at a very big level. And they've brought on this this woke DEI leftist
Mm,
style slant that was never there when I went to high school. It's only
yeah.
a recent thing. Whereas in the United States, it's been ongoing for 30 years.
Sure. And depending on where, like Washington or California, as
Yeah, so
opposed to Montana.
I've got friends who send their kids to public education in places like Iowa, and they don't have this
Sure.
problem. But then
Sure.
I got another friend who is a teacher in California, public education.
Right. Yeah.
She is middle of the road politically, but her school is basically just a lefty cesspool. So it
Sure.
just depends.
Sure. Yeah. Well, isn't that the issue? And then the lack of, I guess, the concern is generally, and for the Libertarian Party, it's the removal of the authority of the parent primarily to the current dominant ideology of the state might be the point of concern.
It is. The major issue we find as libertarians is that we're seeing a removal or how shall I say it, a surrendering or a retreat from individual responsibility, parental rights, and a full-throated handover to the government.
Okay. And we should probably step into this now. What could you give us a summary of what the Libertarian Party stands for? I mean, you kind of just done it, but there would probably be key policy factors on the key issues, right?
Oh, I guess the key issues is the cost of living. One of the driving forces of cost of living is government policies and the way that they are structured in around spending. A good example is this, and other people have spoken about this at length, but one of the key driving forces of cost of living is the pursuit of the green energy agenda. Set down, here's the problem. Libertarians believe in a foundational ability to govern our own country. Okay, so they want Australians governing Australia. Unfortunately, what's happened is successive years of politics, we've seen governments sort of fall in line with, say, European entities. And they've said, look, the Paris Climate Accord and so on and so forth, we're jumping on board. So the European agenda is one thing that's over for Europeans. So the Chinese, for example, or the Japanese or other countries from Africa and Asia don't jump on board with the European agenda. But what we're seeing is Australia has said, we're on board with what the Europeans are doing, even if it's against our own national interest. And that is kind of a little bit silly because we've got our own problems domestically, and pursuing that agenda, considering how big the population and the economics of Europe is, it's sort of self-defeatist. The green energy pursuit is one of the things that's driving cost of living in this country. See, now I'm okay with solar, I'm okay with wind, sure, no worries. It fits the energy matrix. Unfortunately, when you say to your taxpayers that we're going to go net zero by 2030, what happens is you completely gut things like base power, coal industry, you gut gas, you gut any sort of reasonable measures to deliver power cheaply.
Sure.
Solar and wind has limitations, and the biggest problem is that when you look at the cost of solar and the cost of wind, it is exorbitant because you also need to build transmission lines to deliver that power to cities, essentially where the majority of the population live. And to give you an example, as a pursuit, if I want to replace one big coal power station, I need to have something like 250,000 acres of solar panels versus one coal power station that might occupy a couple of hectares of total land. So you need to do massive amounts of land clearing. And because you can't have all the solar panels in one location, I've got to split it all up into 15 different locations due to cloud cover, wind, rain, snow, all that stuff. I've got to build hundreds and hundreds of miles of electrical transmission lines and battery backups, and the cost just has a massive blowout. It's a huge blowout, and unfortunately, the taxpayer has to bear the brunt of that cost. And we've seen the cost of living increase with Albanese because he's pushed so hard for this solar, wind, green energy revolution, and unfortunately, Australia's economy is not big enough. We don't have enough taxpayers. Australia is very split up across, it's a huge area of land. It's not like we're the Netherlands where we're this big. So the infrastructure alone is incredibly expensive. and it's just pushing the cost up. It's very, very frustrating. It's
Isn't
very
it?
frustrating.
I'm on the Sunshine Coast, and there's a solar farm like
Mhm.
10 kilometers from me, and there's been endless issues. Well, I have a friend who worked on it, helped to the installation, and I heard all. I've heard it all. And the other one is hail damage. So
Yes.
some of them aren't resistant to hail damage. So and the one they built near here, it's in a flood zone. So we have
Yep.
it's a bit of there's a lot of issues. And so this is one and something I don't know the answer to, but what is the libertarian stance on nuclear?
Essentially, we don't have a public policy, but we support this. Like, essentially, my personal opinion is that nuclear is fantastic, 100%. Now, the the libertarian policy, most of the libertarians I've spoken to are pro-nuclear as
Sure.
a personal position, but I don't think the libertarians as a public policy have it. And I
Mhm.
think the reason why is mostly because the current existing moratorium against nuclear development in this country, i.e., it is illegal, therefore there's no point having a policy until the powers that be, i.e., whoever the prime minister is, can basically scrap the moratorium. As soon as that happens, I believe there will be a public policy from the libertarians
Sure.
regarding it.
But it's problematic.
It's problematic.
One of our members who's been on the podcast he started nuclear for Central Queensland Nuclear Alliance or something
Mhm.
like this.
Yep.
And he even in registering the organisation, there was issues because it was technically against the law
It's
to.
against the law. That's right. Now, there's certain. Here's the thing from my personal thing, and this is a lot of people don't understand about nuclear, is that 70 years ago, after World War II, when nuclear was being discussed, there was a split in the United States about which technology there was to pursue, and
Sure.
it started with a group called the Sierra Club. I think it was Sierra Club with Harry Truman, I think, as the president at the time. And there was a split on which technology to pursue. And the pursuit of technology that was governed by the United States was towards heavy water reactors or pressure water reactors. And that
Mhm.
is essentially what became the majority of nuclear reactors around the world, because essentially that's the first technology that the US adopted. Therefore, Great Britain, France, Russia,
In
and others took it
1955
on.
ish.
So, but the problem was that there were concerns from scientists in the 40s and 50s about pursuing this technology due to waste and fallout. Those are the two major concerns.
Yep.
Other side of
Noble.
the other side, Chernobyl is a perfect example. Now, the other side of the argument was pushing forward for things like breeder reactors and thorium reactors and salt reactors. And the cool thing with those is they don't have those failings. They're harder to service because they're more corrosive or they need a recycling of parts, so on and so forth, more frequently than pressure reactors. But the cool thing is they don't have the fallout problem at all. And they produce less waste, significantly less waste. Now, fast forward 50 years, we go from a time when people were designing nuclear plants, pen and paper, to computer assisted drafting and computers with huge amounts of data processing so they can do all of the analysis. Scientists have realized that the technology that was sort of put by the wayside in the 50s was actually the superior version. So the new generation of nuclear technology that Peter Dutton has been pushing for, and this is what Bill Gates has signed up for with his organization called TerraPower, with the modular reactors, molten salt, thorium, and fast breeding reactors. They produce almost no waste. They can burn off the waste. They can't have a fallout. They're very resistant to all manner of weather and environment, earthquakes, cyclones, so on and so forth. They're pretty much immune to it. And they're not that expensive.
Right. Yeah, and Australia has natural resources of uranium,
Yes,
and so the nuclear waste thing, like I mean, it's a good like it's here naturally, and there would be an intelligent way to to deal with the waste, given
correct,
the size of Australia, and
correct.
it is an issue, but it's definitely resolvable.
Well, the molten salt reactors or the fast breeder reactors that were designed as prototypes have demonstrated, and I believe that China has just built one in the last sort of 10 years, and it produces almost no waste.
Interesting,
And the little amount that it does, the cooling period for the waste that's produced is less than 20 years,
fascinating.
whereas the older ones were thousands of years.
Sure. Okay. This is getting back to national politics.
Sure.
I guess the issue is, we've seen the ALP assert that Dutton's plan is going to cost $600 billion,
No, it won't
which
cost that.
and so it seems like misinformation. I hate saying the word misinformation, but it seems like
It's
they're
a lie.
deliberately I think that's fair. But do we actually have a budget? Like, do you know like what it would actually cost
Well,
approximately?
look, I'd rather not talk about the political side of it because I find that the political kickball of costings is always more fantasy than reality. If I want to talk about the cost of nuclear, I'd rather speak about somebody who's actually doing the work. Now, ideologically, I don't really agree with Bill Gates on a lot of things. There's plenty of disagreement with that.
Yep.
But the thing is, the man is a billionaire. He invests money where he sees
Yep.
possibility. Okay, he's not stupid. Now,
Yep.
Bill Gates about 20 years ago went all in on solar and wind, and then realized after about 15 years, he said, "Do you know what? It's a fruitless gamble. It costs too much and doesn't deliver what it promises." And then in 2011, I believe, he switched over to an organization called TerraPower, which is building nuclear power plants because he saw the future in nuclear.
Yep.
And for him, he put costings out in 2014, I believe, and he said that for what was it, I think it was a gigawatt. So a gigawatt full system set up from him would be around 7 billion US dollars. Now, that's about 11 billion Australian for a gigawatt of power production.
Yeah.
That's pretty, that's it. Now,
Very
that
economic.
sounds like a lot.
No, but relatively.
It's not. In relative terms, for example, Peter Dutton says that he wants to build seven power plants across the eastern seaboard or major cities. Now, if I take Bill Gates' costings, even tack on a pretty pretty marginal amount of inflation to that from his 2014, 2015 costings, I'm only looking at like 70, 80 billion
Sure.
to essentially power all of Australia on nuclear, or 80% of Australia on nuclear.
Yep. Yep.
So 70 billion versus 600 billion. I'm sorry, I'd rather take the word of Bill Gates, who is an industrious man, over some Albanese who I think's mostly a half-wit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and okay, yeah. I think that's fair. Now, here's another angle to this. What would the libertarian? So, is this something that government should private? What role? What's the relationship between private enterprise and government when it comes to power?
For libertarians,
I,
I
if you can answer that.
it's hard to answer because it depends on the sector. It depends on what the push is. But
Mm,
I've always believed that libertarians should, or well, a libertarian style government, much like what Javier Milei has done in Argentina, is to scale back a lot of the projects that government has pushed forward. Now, I'll give you an example. I'll give you some history here. Kevin Rudd pushed for something called the Building the Education Revolution in 2011 or 2012, I believe it was, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And he promised to put a digital classroom in every school around Australia, a laptop in every school kid's lap, something to
yep.
that effect. It
Yep.
cost billions of dollars. I think $7 billion. I think it was the total costings at the end of the day, and it didn't deliver anything. It was nothing. It was a couple of classrooms in rural Yuendamu and I think a gym in some other school, and that was it. It was just terrible. It was a terrible waste of money. And then you'd look at I think it was the Pink Bat scheme, where it was insulation in homes across Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. And what it did was it killed a whole bunch of tradesmen and it left a whole bunch of businesses broke and sent them into bankruptcy, and it was nothing. So when you look at the history of the both ALP and the Liberal Nationals, they fund a whole bunch of programs that deliver not a lot of anything. And unfortunately, what you see is in Australia, there's a fair amount of nepotism and a fair amount of corruption that happens between friends of political units and government agencies getting these programs off the ground. And the reality is that
You're not suggesting that the unions are corrupt, are you?
well, look, I'm no fan. Look. There are some unions, like the police union in the Northern Territory, that are not corrupt. But then you've got other
Maybe
organised.
union or yeah.
But then you've got other organisations. I'll give you an example. Like, I am no fan of the ACTU. I'm no fan of the ETU or the CFMEU. I think a lot of those organisations have had some very bad characters running their organisations. They have bikie gang affiliations, or they're criminals themselves. And frankly, the standover tactics, the
Leaders.
standover ta- well, look, the standover tactics that some of the unions use is frankly diabolical. And I would I get collective bargaining, I get it, but
And we
there
can
has
see,
to be a
from my perspective, 100 years ago when we were sending thousands of men down into coal mines,
got it.
and unions were fantastic, and we needed workers' rights to protect the proletariat or whatever.
Well,
Lovely. But 100 years ago, and at some point it turned into bikie gangs extorting white collar workers for money.
there are enough. I believe there are enough checks and balances and guardrails for workers' rights. And the funny thing is, a lot of those guardrails exist because of private law firms suing companies for breaches to workers' safety. So what happens is, as a response to the private sector suing other private sector organizations and then arbitrating in court, have led to a rise in standards, both occupational standards, health standards, and wages. Now, obviously, yes, 100 years ago was that way. I would strike and you'd pay me more money, great. But it's not the same now. And I would say the reason for unions' existence is less present now than it was 100 years ago. Unfortunately, the unions don't like the idea that their organisations are at risk of basically going away, which I believe in most cases they should. So they fight tooth and nail to keep their organisations going.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty concerning. So is that what's the libertarian stance there? Like, is there official?
Well, we're not very pro-union, libertarians generally,
Sure. Okay.
and I think it's more to do with the fact that we believe that an individual should have the power to negotiate their wages as they see fit.
Sure. So let's let's talk about some other key characteristics. So
Sure.
taxation. We had an interesting discussion on this recently.
Yeah.
This is fascinating, and I don't think anyone would really, not many people in our group would understand that this is even a viable option. So
Yeah.
let's
So
get into
one
that.
of, so the way that the current system is worked in by the Australian government, GST taxation and so on and so forth, is a progressive tax system. So
Yep.
there is a threshold. I believe it's about $18,000. That's your tax-free threshold, and then after that, for every bracket, you pay an increased tax rate depending on the dollars you earn. And it goes up and up and up and up. And eventually, way at the top of the scale, it's like 37 or 42% tax at the very top end of the scale. Okay. That's how individual taxes work here. And you get deductions obviously on your allowances, work and expenditure and whatnot. If you buy uniforms and you need a car or whatever, you can claim deductions, and you get a tax return at the end of the financial year. That's generally how it works here. The libertarian model for taxation is actually more of a negative tax income. Now, it still has a progressive element to it, but the threshold is higher. Here it goes. So, depending on cost of living, depending on the markets and the market forces at the time, you can set a figure, say it's $50,000. Everything below that essentially pays no tax. Or you get a tax, or depending on how much you earn, you actually get money from the government back. So if you're on, say, $20,000, you can actually take money that money is given to you for the low income in a negative tax income. Yes, I know it's kind of weird, it's kind of wonky, but then above the threshold, 50,000 and above, you pay a progressive rate, but generally it caps out at about 21%.
That's
So
why,
so
like,
yeah,
half.
it's about half, yeah. So when you look at it, and this was designed by economists like Milton Friedman,
Yeah.
it favors, because where the threshold is usually set a little bit below, usually within about 15% of what the standard normal earnings are. So like when you're looking at average household incomes, it's usually within sort of 10 or 15% below that where the threshold is. So people who are on modest incomes for the economy that they live in, the amount of tax they pay is very low. Essentially, your disposable income that you have, the money that you keep, is essentially 92% you keep.
Sure. So you're then the incentivization then is to run a business.
Yes.
And make as much money as possible, or work overtime and make money.
Correct.
Because you're not going to be taxed on it.
Correct. And essentially, when it comes to like cash in hand work or side hustles and so on and so forth, the government has no dealing with that whatsoever. That is yours. That we have no. Essentially, the hands-off nature.
Say that again. That this is something that will be of a lot of interest to thousands of men in our group.
So essentially, how it works is that the side hustles, money that you make off your own back between two consenting parties, private parties that have no government involvement whatsoever, that money you keep. It's 100% yours. It's like if I go to the poker table and win $500 from the casino doesn't take it. It's tax cut. It's mine. So that is yours. It's 100% yours, always.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Wow. So, okay. So then everyone's going to be thinking, how does that affect it? So do libertarians want to close down all the hospitals?
No, absolutely not. The thing is, there's enough, so libertarians want to ensure the critical nature of society is operation. So you've got things like national defense is critically care. You've got things like the Department of Health. You need, now I know it's sort of like a social policy, but you need a healthy, vibrant society. Even at the low end of the spectrum, you still need to provide critical health care to people. And I'm even saying, like, I know the Greens push for dental on Medicare, and I kind of agree with that. I think basic dental is needed. It's needed because
universal healthcare. I wasn't sure what so that's your stance. Is that a libertarian stance?
That's my stance personally. There's a way that you can do direct funding to your public health care that's better than what is being done right now. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of money get tied up in administrative costs to run hospitals and not actually hitting the ground. But the other thing as well is that there's plenty of you look at the quality of healthcare in the private hospitals versus public hospitals in this country. It is significantly higher. I would much prefer to see more private hospitals in this country than public hospitals, because you go to a public hospital, you're sitting in the ER for 7 hours. You go to a private hospital and there's no wait time. Now, here's the cool thing. If you do something like a negative income tax system in your country, even people who earn very little and getting a kickback from the government to compensate the difference, they can afford to go to private healthcare.
Sure. Yep. Fascinating. Wow. So potentially those benefits could increase universally. So even someone who has, I don't know, they struggle with employment, or maybe I don't know, they've got addiction issues. So they're they're a factory worker, so they don't have a lot of income, but they're under the libertarian structure. Potentially, they could
keep 100% of it. Yes.
Fascinating.
The incentive is that essentially you don't need Centrelink, you don't need some sort of government assisted program to help you. And what you do is you take the reins. Like, unfortunately, when you look at a lot of these organizations and charts and so on and so forth, it feels like the government has got its tenterhooks into everything. So if I want to do indigenous workplace placement for people who come from the communities. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the communities have low education outcomes, low attendance rates, alcoholism, drug use, so on and so forth. Now, I want to employ essentially an unskilled labourer to work in my organisation. Unfortunately, what's going to happen is it's going to take a while for me to train him. So therefore, Centrelink is involved in that process, and the government finds a lot of excuses to add on people like consultants and interpreting services to do that process. And unfortunately, the cost just blows out for small businesses. The way you can do it is you can incentivize it by taking off the reins and allow electricians and carpenters, businesses to train these people.
Yeah, fascinating. I've seen it. I used to do that myself. I used to run a social enterprise that was not government funded, and I've seen this firsthand. And the biggest impediment to doing the work with no government funding was the government.
Yes.
That was my experience.
The government puts out a policy of we care. Okay, we care, and when and they run
It's
this
probably
this.
well intentioned.
It's look. There are people in the middle of government who are the most well-intentioned people I've ever met, and they say, "Hey, look, we really just want to help," and I get it. Unfortunately, when your results speak for itself, whereby the results just don't happen, and I think back to a very classical Reagan speech when he said I think it was like the 7 or 11 words, the scariest words you can hear is, "I'm here from the government. I'm here to help."
Yeah.
And we can
That's
and we can see the fault of welfare in other countries. American welfare system has what's led to fatherlessness in homes and crime in inner city. We've seen what the welfare state can do in other countries, and it's really, really horrible because it's happening here too. We see it in indigenous communities. We see the welfare state rules. Unemployment is 90+% in indigenous communities. Vagrancy, crime, alcoholism, abuse, drug use, and it's rife. And because essentially you've put government in control of the land, government in control of water, electricity, housing, education, everything in communities. Government controls 100% of everything. And then the outcomes for Indigenous people in remote community is nothing. They live in squalor. They kill each other, they beat each other over the head, they abuse children, they drink and do drugs, and it is absolutely diabolical. It's worse than third world.
yeah.
If you allowed private industry to go into these communities, set up shop, farms, mining, gas, construction, and you allowed people, what happens is these people would drag themselves out of the squalor, be educated, get employed, the alcoholism would stop, the drug use would stop, the abuse would stop. But the government doesn't want that. The government loves the fact that they have a portion of the population
be doing something so that the government looks like they're doing something good, but it's not. It's
Well, here's a perfect example. This is an analogy to this. In California, and I'll use this, in California, homelessness in the 90s was bad. It was regarded as bad in the 90s. Then what happened was 20 years, you had the governor and others put in NGO after NGO after NGO, all government funded, to like all these different organizations to fund, to solve homelessness and drug use in California. 30 years later, where's homelessness now? It's worse now than it was 30 years ago. But the cost has blown out. Now, like when you go back to the 1992-1993 period in Los Angeles, there were 3 NGOs that were running homeless shelter programs that were trying to tackle homelessness. Now there is hundreds, and the executives of those NGOs earn $500,000 a year, and homelessness has not gone away. So I find that when you fund government programs to tackle a problem, all you do is create more government programs, more government organizations that take a crap load of money out and do nothing.
It's worse than nothing. It's
worse than nothing. It actually goes the other way.
Yeah. I lived this for 19 years, so I know. You're preaching to the converted, but it's great. It's great to record this, and so other people can hear it. And
then we can look at a modern example. Javier Milei in Argentina has cut all these organizations, and guess what? Outcomes, improvements, workflows, investment has gone up, not down, because he cut government out of these programs.
Yeah. So I read today in a very credible government-funded news called the ABC.
Oh yeah.
But it's biblical, effectively, that the Libertarian Party is an extremist political party, and you're extreme. Well, everything they don't like today is extreme right wing. And so that takes us to a whole other thing. Let's step into that. Like what?
Sure.
Take it away. What do you say to that?
Well, I support the defunding of the ABC. That solves one thing. You've got enough. Look, I believe in competition. I don't like seeing organisations take money from the taxpayer, spew leftist propaganda, because I find a lot of the stuff that comes out of the ABC is leftist propaganda.
It's exclusively. I can't see. It's so bad, and it is
Very bad.
misandrist. It is.
Yep.
It's just shameful. Anyway, I totally agree with you on this. I resisted this for years. I used to try and think, well, no, there's but it's increasingly worse and obscure. And it's especially what we're seeing with what used to be fringe groups.
Mm-hmm.
I get the tolerance factor, but it's not. It's against the majority of Australians who are actually working and paying taxes that fund it.
Yes. And there are plenty of private media organisations out there that are connected to the businesses. They advertise, and that's how they fund their programming. Okay, great, no worries. I don't understand why the ABC can't do the same thing. The ABC's model of I'll take taxpayer money from the massive pool of taxpayer, and then I will shove leftist, Marxist, socialist type propaganda in people's throats whenever I get a chance. Well,
exclusively, they don't even try
hide anymore.
to steelman the libertarian perspective or the small government perspective. It's only right, and this is a whole other conversation, that we should step into the right left.
Sure.
That's not. You might have seen my post today. That I don't think anyone understands what right and left wing is.
No, they do not.
And so the issue we've got now is that it's now in common language that what the use of left and right wing, and it means nothing like what it originally meant. So from the French government, people who sat to the right of the king and in the parliament to the left of the king. So that's, my understanding is that that's where it started from. Let's step into this because we spoke about this.
Well, you have to understand that depending on the geography of where you are, the left-right pursuits, ideology, policies, platforms are different. European is different to North America, it's different to South America, it's different to Asia. They all have their own versions of how they operate and employ different things. So the European model is not replicated much outside of Europe. So you can't say that the conservative side of politics in Europe is exactly like what the North American conservative side. It's not the same. They're not alike. And the reason for it is numerous, mostly due to language, culture, religious backgrounds, ethnicities, social programs, government funding, all of it. It's wide and varied. But the traditional left-right dichotomy is the further left you go, the bigger the government. The more right you go, the smaller the government. That's the very basics.
So to go further with that, anarchists would be the most extreme right wing, which is zero government.
Correct.
And then libertarian, slightly left of the anarchists, or left of the anarchists. So smaller government, but it's you're not anarchist because you believe in. Well, I've just heard you say universal healthcare. So you are, the libertarian perspective is you are paying tax, and there are services such as military.
Correct.
Universal healthcare, education, or maybe education, and hospitals. So,
universal healthcare is it's kind of like there needs to be a level, like, as I said, libertarians more of a middle road when it comes to a lot of this stuff. They borrow even. Well, I would say that libertarians are generally centrist, but they are very pro small government and pro and low taxes. So that's a distinction. They do still fit in the left-right narrative because they borrow, as I said, all parties need to split two major groups. There's social policies and there's economics. Now, on the economic side of things, we are very strong right. When it comes to social policies, we borrow certain things towards the center.
Okay. Yeah, and we should give some examples of that. So I understand on even like gay marriage or something like this, which is like the religious conservatives or the traditionalists, maybe we could say them, were opposed to.
Correct.
to this, whereas the libertarian stance is it's not government's business, so
Business,
that
correct.
it's to your individual conscience, and then
Correct.
marriage. If you're Christian religious, then marriage is between you and the church
Correct.
and your partner, and so then it's just, these are two separate institutions.
Well,
Effectively,
essentially, if you look at the strongest adherents to very hardcore libertarian viewpoints, it's that the government should have nothing to do with marriage, full stop. They should have nothing to do with family. That's it. We have nothing
and
to do with your
maybe
kids. We have
administrative.
nothing to do with. What's that?
So one of the maybe administrative. So Kevin Rudd, which I actually agreed with on this, he made the civil union. So the recognition of gay couples in hospitals, like there was issues where like, you know, a gay couple that they're an effective de facto civil union, but not registered by the government. And if his partner was, you know, dying in hospital, he wasn't technically allowed to even,
Yep,
you know, so there were just some pretty ridiculous administrative issues,
there is.
and which Kevin Rudd overturned, I think, in 2008, or
Mhm.
which I think that makes sense from an administrative perspective. We,
Sure.
you know, these are humans who have human rights, like
Correct.
so. So then, I guess what I'm suggesting is that maybe the government's role is administrative in recognizing these things.
Well, look, for me personally, like I come from a Christian upbringing, so for me, I don't believe in polygamy personally. This is my personal view. I don't believe in
So
polygamy.
you're not a Mormon.
No, not a Mormon, but there will be a lot of Mormons out there, obviously.
Sure,
Now,
sure.
so
Whatever,
the
and whatever, and that there are, I know there are Mormons in the group,
sure.
in our group, and well, sorry, I'm interrupting. Keep going.
So like for me personally, I don't really want the government involved in what happens in the bedroom. I don't want it involved one bit. Okay, I don't want
As long
them
as it's
anywhere
consensual.
near it. It's between two consenting adults, and what you do behind in your room in your house, that is your business. The government has no place in that. I've always believed that since I was a kid. Now, when it came to the marriage plebiscite that was done, my argument at the time was if they want to rewrite the Marriage Act, they could do it with three simple words: two consenting adults. But yeah, they made a big stink about it. They spent a lot of money on it, and I thought it was completely ridiculous because I thought, well, it was a simple matter of two consenting adults is a legal term whereby you limit it to two people. Consent, i.e., the basis of the fact that I can't be forced into marriage, and like we get away with child marriage, or we get away with families trying to marry people off, or whatever, or some sort of religious practice, and we're looking purely at secular. So we're talking non-denominational, non-religious, and adult. You have to be 18 years of to consent. All right.
Yep.
It's the simplest thing that you can look at when you come to marriage, and you get government out of the way. I don't care if two men want to get married. I don't care if two women want to get married. I don't care if you call yourself a cat and you want to marry the dog next door. Like, as long as you're a consenting adult, I don't care.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's a libertarian stance, and because that would be
Yes.
considered like a very liberal, like in the 1980s or 1990s, like that would be a liberal. I mean, progressive even.
Well, libertarians are essentially traditional liberals, but
So
because
you'd be religiously conservative but politically liberal.
well, essentially, like, look, if I want to get into the weeds in regards to religion, um, if you talk about it, God created man in the image of God, and He empowered humanity with the brains and the will to choose His own path. He
Sure.
gave us the ability to do that. If you want to look at it from a religious point of view, so I look at free will. I don't believe in fate. I'm very much against the idea of fate. So you've got the two concepts of free will and fate, i.e., something is predetermined versus I have the choice.
Yeah.
I don't believe in fate. I believe that every person is an individual. They have inherent human rights, and the inherent rights are things like I have the ability to travel, work, operate, live my life how I want, free of government. I do not want government telling me what I can and can't do. If I am not hurting anybody, that's the key thing. As long as I do no harm, I am not hurting another human being, I have the right to live my life free of government intervention.
Yep. Okay. So John Stuart Mill on
Yeah.
liberty. Yeah, as long as you're not imposing or causing harm to another individual.
Correct. So when you look at the founding fathers of the United States, you look at the George Washingtons and you look at the Benjamin Franklins and the John Adams and so on and so forth, they inculcated
Massive fan
that
of Ben Franklin. He was the inspiration for the
yeah,
business advice group.
it was in the knowledge base was that government was the Civil War in America. Sorry, not the Civil War. The Revolutionary War in America was that it was taxation without representation, i.e., the government is stepping in, take away my rights to do what I want, this land, do whatever they want, and I don't have any rights. I don't have the say to live my life free of government. And then you look at all of the, I'm trying to think of the name, all the French dissidents out of France that fled to America, to the colonies. All of that was to essentially escape government control, essentially aristocracy. They wanted to get away from it. Now, the founding fathers of the United States were all essentially libertarians, what you'd class as libertarians, because they said that there was nothing between you and God, i.e., you were an individual, you had rights. Okay, and they incorporated that into the Bill of Rights in the United States.
Yep. Okay. And so you mentioned this the other night that libertarians would advocate for a Bill of Rights for.
I don't know if the Libertarian Party on the whole supports the concept of a Bill of Rights. I do. I believe that a push for a national Bill of Rights, because I don't believe our Constitution fully articulates an individual rights. So I'll give you an example. Australia is a signing member of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the Charter of Human Rights. So you look at the UN Charter of...
Penned in 1948. You read that, you're like, yeah, I agree with pretty much, like, there's nothing that it's a great document.
So it's funny because you look at the UN Charter of Human Rights, and then you see all of the similarities side by side with the United States Bill of Rights, and you go, hey, look, the Bill of Rights was written 200 years prior to this one, and they're essentially the same. Yeah. Now, Australia signed
fair trial, swift no detention without representation, and
you got it.
Trial,
free speech, marry who you want, seek employment wherever you want. The government can't say no. Okay, the government's not allowed to do that. So Australia is a signing member of the UN Charter of Human Rights. Great, but do we use the UN Charter for Human Rights in Australian law? No.
No, yeah. Well,
we're happy.
We do. It references it, but but they're overtly contradictory. Like,
correct.
Family Law Act. It is.
Yes. Well, okay. A good example. So I think it's, I can't remember which segment of the UN Charter of Human Rights, it says that you have the right to protect yourself from harm, i.e. the right to defend yourself. Now, in common law in Australia, you also have the right to defend yourself. However, in places like Victoria,
or something like that.
Places like Victoria, I believe it was maybe 10 years ago, the Victorian Commissioner, including the Minister for Police, about 10 years ago, was referencing a crime that happened in Victoria where somebody was broken into in their home. They were raided by this gang, and they were assaulted and raped and so on and so forth. And the police commissioner and the Minister for Police said, do you know what you can do? If somebody breaks into your home, barricade yourself in the room and just wait for them to go away. You have no right to defend yourself. And then we've seen case after case in Australia where people who have defended themselves have been dragged into the courts and charged with crimes. And you're like, are you serious? Like, I was in my own home defending myself from this person, and now I'm in court defending that? Like, are you crazy? And unfortunately, I see this as a removal of personal rights in this country. And I think a Bill of Rights that stipulates that you have these rights that the government cannot take away under any circumstance needs to be incorporated in the Australian ethos, the way that we govern.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I feel on the other side is no Prime Minister will want that, because one, I think they're gutless, and the second time is that a Bill of Rights would take away their inherent power to essentially write bills and or to create policy that essentially stamps on our rights.
Yep. I agree. Fascinating. So Menzies, when he launched the Liberal Party, I think in the 50s or 60s.
Yep.
He said
40s, I think.
Was it that early?
I think it was the 40s.
Oh, was it? Was it that early? So he said that there's an audio recording. I'm going to butcher it, but it's not. He said it didn't want to be too far to the right, too far to the left. He wanted to be centrist, where something that the majority of Australians would get behind. So it was meant to be a centrist idea. and liberal in the sense of the. My understanding is, maybe John Stuart Mill's use of the word liberal, which is liberal, like so economically liberal, but also, liberal.
Well, as I've said before, the centre line between left and right has moved
Yeah.
as time has sort of carried on. So things like the Civil Rights Act in 1964 in America moved the centre line. It moved the centre line, and then certain arguments around free speech, civil rights, gun control, other things where Christianity has its place has moved the centre line. Now, the centre line in Europe, especially in Western Europe, is more left than say Australia, or more left than say America. So it just depends. Now, the Liberal Party of Australia was designed essentially as a conservative party. It does have conservative economic policies,
Sure.
but you're right, it does have a liberal
So
slant
in
whereby,
the sense that it's a smaller government than what the ALP would advocate for.
correct, yeah,
Okay.
and less involved, and obviously no involvement with unions.
Okay. Or minimal.
Minimal.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Okay. Interesting. So then, what's the juxtaposition between the Liberal Party and the Libertarians? I think a lot of our members would be interested in that
I think
position.
with the Liberal Party and the National Party, they've gone much the way that a lot of old parties go when they're trying to appease everybody. They get big and they get bloated. When I first joined party politics when I was 18, I joined the Northern Territory branch of the CLP. The CLP was the Country Liberal Party, which was essentially the NT's version of the National Party and the
Ah,
National LNP,
sure.
so on and so forth. So I've been a conservative for as long as I can remember. Now, the how shall I say it? The libertarians differ a little bit in the sense that they hold the core belief of people like your Milton Friedmans and people like your Barry Goldwaters, where government becomes over time, over years, over successive governments, with successive programs, they keep adding on and adding on and adding on, but they never go back and remove old stuff that doesn't have a place anymore. Libertarians have a position of why we're happy to go back and cut things. For example, and I hate to say it, but you look at Donald Trump's first term, he said, if I want to put down a new bill or a new piece of law, you've got to remove 2 old ones. That's
Interesting.
a very critically libertarian approach to dealing with government. Okay, I want to introduce a new program, great. Then I've got to cut 2 that sort of don't serve its purpose anymore or aren't relevant anymore. The Liberal Party hasn't really done that, like the CLP in the Northern Territory hasn't done that. They've still got stuff on the books from 20 years ago that is still there. And you're like, well, does this really serve the purpose? Why is it still there? Oh, it's just because it's there. Okay,
Mm.
why? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Well,
And
there's no.
both parties, ALP and LNP, do the same thing.
Yep. And we've seen most ridiculously in the States with Doge. There's over 400 government departments. So there's more government departments than the United States is old. So
Yes. Yeah.
it's-
And unfortunately, when you have that in place where you're unafraid to offend or you're unafraid to make strong decisions. And I find that when I watch the leaders debates, the 3 of them that I've watched, I find that, and you compare it to the previous leaders debates in the past, you see a continual push towards the middle, but you also see a continual push to not offend. No, none of the ministers, none of the leaders want to make tough decisions or tough calls. Like, they're happy with a few little sound bites, but if I say I want to cut this department because I don't see the point of it, they're like, oh no, they won't do that, not at all. Or they Dutton won't say I want to freeze government employment because the governments are getting too big. He doesn't want to say that. Conversely, Albanese says other things like, I want to spend $600 billion on renewables or $1 trillion on renewables, but where is that money going to come from? Oh, I don't know. It's going to come from somewhere, but mystical cash giving tree. And we see it all the time. And it's really just nonsense because they drift off into the weeds into fantasy land. They don't want to they don't want to talk about the hard realities that Australia is going broke very quickly. And I don't think any of them are serious neither of them are seriously wanting to make the necessary changes to fix the problem that's coming. Like, we are heading for economic collapse in this country, and neither party is talking about it, and it's really, really concerning. People can't afford to eat.
Yeah. It's a serious issue. So that's an interesting one. So I used to work with a lot of addicts. I saw on the libertarian site that there's a push for the decriminalization of like marijuana, mushrooms, and so non like I think heroin and crystal meth should still
Sure.
be illegal, but it's an interesting idea to push towards to treat those issues as a matter of health and individual responsibility. We know from the drug harm study that like alcohol and meth by far,
Yes.
alcohol is absolutely the worst. But what are we going to do? Prohibition for alcohol again? Because that works
Look,
so well.
libertarians don't really believe in the prohibition style of way of doing things because it doesn't do anything. All you do is create black markets, and we are seeing black market trades pop up for other things. Every time the government kicks over and says we're going to ban this, you see a growth in the black market trade. But the other problem as well is that where they don't outright ban something, they say we're going to just tax the hell out of it, and you create a black market that way.
Yes,
because
yep.
cost goes up.
Yeah.
So the libertarians don't want to okay, a perfect model is this. You look at Colorado. So what was his name? Governor Hickenlooper. So Colorado was the first state in the United States to legalize cannabis. Okay. Now Hickenlooper, who was the governor of Colorado just then, he legalized it and put a flat tax of 10%. 10%. Here you go. 10%. Bang. There you go. Done. And what he did was he made every producer of cannabis pay a annual fee. I don't remember what it was. It wasn't very much. I think it was about $500. And what he said was that all money raised from cannabis sales and growth would go straight into public health.
Interesting.
So essentially what happened was over the next 5 years, you saw healthcare improve in Colorado, the crime rate drop, especially around the black market trade of cannabis.
Yep.
And outcomes in the public healthcare sector actually got better because funding was direct. It was the most libertarian policy in regards to public health and also legalization because he chased away the crime gangs that were funneling drugs into the country, into the state.
Yep.
And public healthcare improved. Now,
Yep.
he was a Democrat. Look, he was a Democrat. But the thing is, Hickenlooper is a geologist. He's a geoscientist. He's an engineer. He was a guy that goes, I'm going to work with an economist to get this program passed. So even though he ran under the Democrat ticket, he's not I went to some rich Ivy League school and I was raised in the Democratic trenches. And ideologically, he is a centrist. He's a libertarian in most of the things he does. All of his policies are very middle of the road and pragmatic. And I think libertarians offer to Australia a very pragmatic approach both to social policy and economic policy. We get both parties delve deep into their ideology when it comes to policies they want to push forward. Unfortunately, it doesn't serve anybody. It serves them, great, and it serves their donors and it serves their base and it serves some of their special interest groups. Unfortunately, to the 80% of Australians that sit in the middle going, how does it serve us? How does it better us? It doesn't. It doesn't serve them.
Fascinating. Yeah, I bought a pouch of tobacco last week and it was $140 for 50 grams of tobacco. And I was chatting to the proprietor because it's been I smoke a very small amount of tobacco. Like one pouch will last me a year probably. And he said that I think it was some outrageous amount. It was like $60 of that pouch
is
taxation, which is it's just insane.
Yes.
And so maybe the health costs for smoking does have a substantial health cost. So there is an argument for that. But then so I know several men, Australians, older Australians. Oh, I know several who have done prison time for marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And the prison costs, I know last time I checked, it's about $110,000 a year.
Correct.
I don't know. I got a friend from Texas who did time in Texas for smoking a joint, and so there's not only there's that cost as well. That's accumulated in this. Now, marijuana, you could marijuana is not health. So there's this other argument where it's okay to have everything. So there's not even good So we're spending all this money. We're spending billions of dollars every year. And then there's all this misinformation around it, like going, well, cannabis is actually totally safe and okay. It's like, no, it's not. It's neither is alcohol. Like alcohol and cannabis have a bunch of issues.
Well,
they shouldn't be illegal. We should just know. Well, this is my personal take on it, and this is not just personally. This is not just me. I've worked in this space, and I've worked with a lot of drug addicts, and the mental health issues connected with cannabis. The data is absolutely clear that if you smoke too much, especially from a young age, like for alcohol and cannabis and other drugs. But we're seeing medicinal benefits, like, so let's step down, like kava, mushrooms, psilocybin, and MDMA now. These have powerful therapeutic benefits, which we're not allowed to have because they're put in the same bag as heroin and...
Yeah, the argument for healthcare, specifically around CBD oils, because you got to separate the two. You've got CBD, cannabinoid oils, and then you got THC. Now, there's
nothing wrong with CBD. Like CBD is entirely safe. Maybe some fringe issues for some individuals, but generally it's.
So, from what I understand of the pharmacokinetics of, within the marijuana plant and in cannabis, there are, I think it's between 2 or 3 different types of oil protein groups that essentially are the key anti-inflammatory, chains that work within CBD oil. And if you process it correctly and you do the proper separation, and you essentially focus on those particular molecular chains, that's where you get the health benefits from. Now, THC on the other side has the same kind of things, but it also has problems with disconnecting neurons and killing brain cells and other things.
Yep.
Now, so for me, I'm a firm believer that CBD oil should be used in medicines in Australia.
Yep.
100%. Now, but then this is from a purely scientific point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, I'm not a pharmacologist. I did a little bit of this studying years ago, so I know a little bit of it. And I know what the fallout problem with THC is. But then on the libertarian side of things is that I believe that if you're an adult and you've made the informed decision to smoke marijuana and you fully are aware that there is a negative consequence of that action, much like drinking alcohol, that is your decision as a free-thinking adult making adult decisions. I don't believe the government should have any say on that.
Yeah, brilliant, fascinating. So in that sense, it is progressive. Like
I don't like getting into the weeds of progressive.
That's a loaded term, right? Like
it is, because I think it belies the fact you basically boil away nuance and intent and rationale into these stupid catchphrase lines.
Yep.
I think it's regressive, and I don't think it suits higher discourse.
I agree. It's just interesting to hear, and it's good to get clarification around terms when we're one for this discussion, but then also for others who are interested in actually learning what do we mean when we say left and right, and progressive, regressive, centrist. What does this actually mean, and how does this roll out so we can have a conversation and make an informed decision?
Right. Okay. So the very bare bones of it, when you strip away all of the ideological nuance or the religious overtones or some of the crazy racial biases or sexual biases that exist in certain groups, if you strip it down to government, just government, or the responsibility of government or the size of government, the further left you go, the bigger the government. Okay? Whereby the more left, more towards hardcore Marxism or Marxist utopia, I call it, you get government who controls everything. It controls your life, it controls the means of production, it controls the distribution of goods, the welfare state, it controls jobs, it controls healthcare, education, media, everything. That is full, total, left-leaning control.
Yep.
On the very strong far right, you get people like Ayn Rand, whereby basically it is the complete opposite. I hate government.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not anarchy, because anarchists have a ideological slant, like what you find in shows like The Purge, whereby government takes the reins off and then anarchy just swallows the world.
And there's also this other party that's popped up. So we saw with BLM and then Antifa, like the anti-fascist.
Yeah.
Where does that fit into it? I mean,
Now,
obviously, I know that libertarians are not, because
no.
you're opposed to violence or
No, we don't, because the thing is, like, as I said before, with libertarian values is that I want to live my life and do no harm. That is a key underlying, like, we don't want government intervention ruining our lives or taking away our rights, but we have rights. Like, I have rights, you have rights. So you have the right to live your life free from other people trying to kill you or take your life. So there has to be, it is about civil responsibility, about decorum, about respect. Now, I respect you as a human, you respect me as a human. If you want to live your life your way, I want to live it my way, no worries, fine. We can still have a beer. Great. Anarchists don't follow that. They basically hate the world and want to burn the world to the ground. Very, very different ideologies. Now, the anti-fascist argument, here's the problem with the understanding of fascists. It is widely misunderstood, and there's a lot of mistruths told about it. Fascist is not a hardcore right-leaning ideology. It is a lie. It has been perpetrated for 70 years, and to this day it makes me sick. Fascism is not a right wing, it is a left-leaning ideology. It has always been a left-leaning ideology.
what? And would it left leaning, or I mean,
Left wing. It's always been a hardcore left wing ideology.
yep.
There are differences. So rather than so this go when you go down the left side, much like the right side, you get a divergence, like a splitting off of different types of takes on how you can enact a small government society.
Yep.
Okay. On the far left side of things, you get the same bifurcation or splitting off of how you structure society.
Sure.
Now, fascists, like when you look at the history of fascism, so the man.
Can we step back just for a moment, like historically,
Sure.
from a there's the right left thing started off right of the king, who were monarchists, and then left of the king, like I said, leading up to the French Revolution, right? This is my understanding. There was your monarchists to the right, your anti-monarchists to the left in French Parliament, right? Yes, and so then that's where we start going to the idea of like that's the first mention of right and left, yeah.
Yeah, it is. But as I've said
But
before,
we don't use that now, so that's where it
no.
started. But then it's not like, and like you said, depends which country you're in now and which
Yeah,
decade you're in.
yeah. And times have changed. Like it's hard to use the 17th century or 18th century French model and say it's still relevant now in the same
Sure.
dichotomy of left or right. It's not the same because in simpler terms that is correct for that time. But then
Sure.
you look at the events that happened after that. You had Karl Marx through the 19th century.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
had the American Revolution and the American Civil War. You had the internal conflicts for 300 years of Europe, where the left and the right jockeyed for different types of groups, and they all switched back and forth on a lot of different policies. So it's really, really hard to go back 300 years and then apply it now.
Sure. And isn't that the issue? And so I've even read that in like the ABC today, which is a very extreme left wing. By no matter what metric you use, it's extreme left wing.
Yes.
So we've okay. So then we've got the Marxist thing. So in 1848, we've got the Communist Manifesto gets written
Yep.
by Karl Marx.
Yep.
And then this is the rise of the proletariat, and which led to the unions. That's what is still now the underpinnings of what we would call left. Is that more or less?
Yeah. So his one was talking. Karl Marx is not an economist. He was a writer. People call him a visionary. I don't think he was a visionary. I think he was a moron. He worked for a printing press. He printed his own stuff.
But he was so successful.
Well, no, he died. He died in poverty. He died in poverty.
He didn't do anything, I think.
He didn't do anything.
He wrote a few books that were have made a lot of copies. That's his claim to fame.
Yeah, but his works were picked up by some pretty radical political figures at the very tail end of his life and then after his death. And people like Joseph Stalin and
Mao.
well, yeah, Mao. You've got also got Lenin. You've also got Trotsky. You've got people like Giovanni Gentile, who I'm about to talk about.
Yes, yeah.
And then you got Diedrich. What was his name? He was Hitler's mentor. Was also a fan of Marx's works. So like, and then you got
You're not suggesting that the Nazis were left wing.
oh, they were the National Socialist Party was so. Here's the thing. This is where I laugh about the fascist argument on the right.
But they were fascists.
Yeah.
And
So
fascists, I've read it on the ABC. The fascists are right wing.
you see it on Wikipedia too. It's I'm gonna get into the weeds, so just bear with me. So the father of fascism. So people look at fascism and say, "Oh, it's Hitler." No, it predates Hitler by a number of years. An Italian educator. He was minister for education, and he was involved in the Italian Parliament for a long time. His name is Giovanni Gentile. He was the father of fascism, and he worked very closely with Benito Mussolini, who was obviously the dictator of Italy up until the Second War. Now he had quite a few objections to the way Karl Marx and Engels had designed socialism or Marxism. And he said that there were inherent sociological differences between cultures, i.e., say, for example, the Italian culture was better than a sub-Saharan culture. Okay, there were differences. So Karl Marx basically said the world needs to be a Marxist everything. All cultures need to adopt this society, regardless of ethnicity, creed, color, religion, whatever.
He wouldn't have supported DEI initiatives today.
Well, I don't know because a lot of because essentially you look at Germany. So Karl Marx was German. When you look at German culture in the 19th century, it was pretty homogeneously German. Not German, but Prussian.
Sure. Yeah.
Whatever. So it was a pretty homogeneous society. Everybody was around him was white.
Some of the things he said is just, but it is a very different time. So it's hard to judge with today's morality post the civil rights movement with today's morality.
Correct.
So like everyone was racist back then.
Well, I just think the cross culturalization, multiculturalism that we see today wasn't as quite as known or obvious in 1840.
Yep.
So a lot of people who write about things that they know or see or experience as a personal reflection of their life. I don't know how much Karl Marx personally involved himself in, or how many people he met that were not German.
Yep.
All right. Fast forward 70 years.
He never would have met a black African man and had a meaningful I just don't think it just wouldn't have happened. Hey.
No. But then conversely, when you look at people like Giovanni Gentile, now Italians from north to south have had a lot of involvement because of the Roman background, have had North Africans, for example. So you got Tunisians, Moroccans, Egyptians, Libyans, so on and so forth, living in southern Italy, even during, predating World War I, World War II, so the time that Giovanni Gentile lived. So he had a lot of people who were African background or Middle Eastern background in Italy. So the demographics of Italy in the early 20th century were very different to Germany in the mid to early 18th century or 19th century. Very, very different. Now, Giovanni Gentile, who is the father of fascism, when he wrote essentially his fascist manifestos, he referred to Marx or referred to socialism or Marxism for a lot of the key underpinnings for how society should be structured. Now, Gentile himself was very anti-religious. He was a staunch atheist, much like Marx was. But the problem was Benito Mussolini, as the leader of Italy, who was with the ties to the Vatican and the ties to the Roman Catholic Church, couldn't square that peg in a round hole and push for full fascism in Italy, because he would have lost his supporting, who were all Roman staunchly Roman Catholic. But the size of government, which was spoken about by Gentile in fascism, much like what was talked about by Marx in Marxism, was that the growth of government needs to be in control of the means of production, employment, national defense, education, everything. Government needs to control everything. And there was no individual before the state. That was the key point, whereby the individual is not important, only the state is important. And both of those structures, fascism and socialism or Marxism, believed that there was no person before the state. Nobody was more important than the state. The libertarian philosophy is that the individual is more important than the state. That's the libertarian stance. And essentially, that's a classically conservative or even a Christian conservative value, because when you look at the history of Christendom or Christianity, Jesus Christ was an individual against the state who was persecuted by the state.
Sure.
And he spoke to his followers that the state was not more important than your right, your being. So this is why I say
an underpinning philosophy in the West.
Correct. But it's also an underpinning for the left-right dichotomy, whereby the left talks about there's nothing before the state. The state is the most important thing, i.e. the government. Far left, fascism, socialism, Marxism, Leninism, and all the other ones on that side of the scale. And then on the right of the individual is paramount. It is the most important thing. And that is the very polarized difference between the two.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so you're positing that, so fascism is an iteration of Marxism.
It is a different take. See, now, when so the main thing, one of the main things was,
I guess there is some controversy there because, well, Mussolini and Hitler, they were both fascist, but they were
yes,
there was alliances with the communists, so like Stalin initially, but
yes, well,
and then they fought as well, so the Bolsheviks versus the
yeah. So here's the thing, and a lot of people will use that against me or other people who say that, is that, well, the fascists went after the communists. Yeah, but the problem is there was an ideological underpinning between communism and fascism, and it had a racial tone, a very strong racial tone, whereby the fascists, like Giovanni Gentile, talked about things like homogenous society, i.e., Italians for Italians, and Germany basically said, under Hitler, said
this
Germany for Germans.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So when they talk about it, there's a racial tone, whereas Marx's original point, which became communism,
but also nation.
yes,
State.
correct.
But then Hitler and Goebbels sort of thing is like the purity of it was more of like a race thing.
It was a race thing, but it was more of a social thing, whereby a shared upbringing of a national cultural identity.
Sure.
I can share this cultural identity with other people who share the same cultural identity as me.
Sure.
This was what the initial push from Hitler was that he didn't like the idea that there was a flood of migrants from other parts of the world diluting what it means to be a German or what it means to be a pure race or thereabouts.
Yep.
So yes, there was that really strong cultural racist push, but it had a lot to do with the relevance of cultural importance or how cultures work together. Whereas when you look at Marx and communism stuff, when you look at Greater Russia or the Soviet Union, they had a lot of different groups from a lot of different ethnicities. When you go down to like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, others, you got the Muslim involvement in those states that were part of the greater Soviet Union. You had the Baltic states that had a mix of like your Armenian, your Turks, so you had Muslims, Jews, you had Christians, you had Orthodox, you had Jesuits, you had all sorts of things. So the Russians, for the most part, did not care what color, what creed, what religion you were, as long as you sort of believed in the nation state of communism. Whereas the Germans took a different slant, whereby no, the cultural importance was just as important as the side of government, because you can't understand what it means to be German unless you're a German.
Right, and ideally Aryan.
Yeah, that had a more of a
which none of the Nazi leadership were.
Well, no, that's right. Well, because Hitler was half Jewish on his mother's side, and he was from Austria, and Goebbels was some throwback, and Himmler was a disabled throwback. But and the funny thing is, when you look at the higher ups of Hitler's inner circle, essentially, most of them were kind of like a mixed bag of not very much of anything. There were a few standouts. Hermann Goering was one. He was part of the sort of the aristocracy, the rich upper class in
And
Germany.
very proficient in World War One, and like he
Yes,
was a war
he was
hero.
a decorated war hero. He was very well regarded.
But he was brought in like more of a for PR for the Nazis. Yeah, like
Yeah, but he was also very flamboyant. He was good looking. He was a war hero from wealth, and he was regarded by the Nazi Party as someone who could not only organize and strategize, but also get a lot of involvement, especially from the upper class, in the Nazi Party. And he did. But
right.
as a sort of a leader, he wasn't very good because two things: he was injured, so he was a habitual narcotics user, and he was basically a windbag.
Sure. Yeah, right. And I guess there's the democratic element of this, like that like the Nazis weren't voted in. They didn't certainly didn't get 51% of the vote, right? Like um,
No, but
it was
during
effectively a coup. Well, that's why Hitler went to prison and wrote Mein Kampf, because he tried a coup and then that failed. Went to prison.
yeah, so during like the early, he adopted a strategy of violent revolutionary overthrow. And this is what Marx called for: violent revolutionary struggles. It worked in Red October in Russia, where essentially Lenin overthrew the government, the monarchy of Russia, and he overthrew the government, and it led to violent revolution. It worked there. It didn't work in Germany. He tried that, but the national government of Germany at the time basically got sick of his antics and put him in prison. And then he wrote Mein Kampf and so on and so forth.
Sure, sure.
But then afterwards, he realized that that wasn't going to work with the German people. And this is during the 20s. So post World War One, Germany was riding a wave, kind of. So on the political side, they signed the Treaty of Versailles with the French. They were paying reparations to the French from World War One. But then, because rather than go bankrupt, Germany was taking massive loans out of the American economy, who was basically propping up the German economy. Now, so this is why we call it the Roaring Twenties, because in America, the amount of money that was being loaned out on good interest to Europe to rebuild after World War One was funding a lot of stuff in the States. And Germany was kind of riding the wave because they were getting massive amounts of money from the States to do employment and construction and everything else. So everything was going grand in Germany. And you had this guy by the name of Hitler who was basically saying that the end is near and it's all going to come apart at the seams if you keep voting for these people who don't care about you. And he was regarded as a radical and an idiot. Then what happened was in 1929, the Wall Street crash happened. All the loans basically got called in, and Germany went from 4% unemployment to 30% unemployment overnight. And then people who had ignored Hitler and said he was a radical idiot had said, "Oh my God, he's been saying this for years, and he saw it coming."
Interesting.
And then the aura around him changed because people then saw him as sort of like a fortune teller,
Got a
as a
solution.
mystical element.
He's got the final solution.
Well, I hate to use that word, but he was talking about Germans for Germany, not relying on the backs of other powers like the Americans and so on and so forth for years. And then when it all came to pass in 1929, it sort of was like, well, he was right. Maybe we should pay attention to him. And
Yeah.
he got a lot of traction following that. Now, the National Socialist Party that the Nazi Party sort of sprung out of, had been running successive elections, pushing for elections over and over again. And every state election, every county election, they kept pushing, and they kept making gains, because especially after 1929. So they were voted into power, but they didn't take majority.
Sure. They were a fringe, I think 5% ish or something.
Yeah, but then they went up to about 30% after 1929.
Oh.
They won a significant amount of seats in a lot of legislatures.
Interesting.
So the Chancellor of
when he took power, my understanding it was still a coup, yeah, like because it wasn't
Not
democratically.
quite. Not quite. So he wanted the full swag. He wanted everything. He wanted to be in charge of everything. And there were certain concessions that were made.
What
Yeah,
did
by I believe it was
right.
Hindenburg who gave him other things. But then what happened was I think it was in 33 he died. The leader of the chancellor died, and that's after he had basically kicked the bucket. That's when Hitler had basically cemented enough support, and he killed enough of his opponents or got them thrown in prison because he still had political power, that he cemented his control.
Right. Yep. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting.
But if you look at the way that the before he was imprisoned to post imprisonment Hitler and the political movements, and he actually completely changed how he presented himself. Prior, you saw him in military uniform because he was a veteran of World War One. You saw him as a man, and he pushed that revolutionary style in the beer halls around Germany. And then after his imprisonment, he came out in suit and tie as a polished politician.
Right.
Very different look. And the reception around it was also very different too. So he went through a complete character reformation,
Interesting.
and it was quite remarkable.
Yeah. And I guess what we like it's that nationalist or extreme nationalist, like
Yeah,
whereas which is very very different to, well, certainly the libertarian thing, but even what we're seeing now, like with the woke movement, like it is different. Like it's fascist in the sense that it's they are right and we are wrong. Like that's the message that we get.
well, see, I look at it this way. I look at the fascists and the communists and the Marxists and all of them. They're all part of the same end of the spectrum, and they all hate each other because they all got different slants on how they want to make government bigger and better in their own way. It's basically like, I want big government. Yeah, you want big government too, but I want a racist side. I don't want a racist side. I want this. I want that. And it's basically, I look at them as kids in a sandbox fighting over toys. They all want what they want. They're all basically beating each other out and biting each other.
Which is high taxes and
Yeah, absolutely.
intense rules that are
Yep,
imposed upon everyone.
yep, yep. That's right. But it's kids. It's
Commonality.
kids in a sandbox, and that's what it is because they all talk about some of the stuff they talk about is just absolute nonsense. It doesn't fit the majority of the population. It doesn't serve the population at all. So and when you're on the, I would say, the conservative side of politics or the libertarian side of politics, and you get called fringe or a fascist or something else, I just have to laugh because these people are idiots. And the ABC, they want to call us whatever they want, go for it, whatever. Libertarians, the philosophy is simple. I don't care what color you are, what creed you are, what religion you are, what you want to call yourself, whether you're a human being or you want to call yourself a battleship or a cat or a monkey. I don't care. I don't care. You're if you're a human being, you have rights. Okay. If you want to if you're an Australian and you want to live in the United States, go for it. No worries. If you want to come here, go for it. As long as there is a rationale or a reason for you wanting to come here. I want to, like, I'm from Nigeria and I want to live in Australia. And I'm a doctor. No worries. We want to make it as simple and as painless as possible. Now, unfortunately, what we're seeing is you're seeing a lot, like the Australian government, Department of Immigration is a perfect example. The Australian government, Department of Immigration, has a favoured nations thought process criteria whereby certain people from certain countries are preferenced over other people from other countries. I think that is the most heinous, ridiculous policy that you can put. Like, I'll say this, my wife is Tunisian. She's from North Africa. All right. North Africans, they speak a whole bunch of different languages. She speaks 15 languages, and getting a marriage visa, we've been married and we've been together for a long time, and we've done all the criteria, we've filled in all the requirements, but getting her here and getting her stay in the country legally has been nothing but a nightmare. But if I had married an American, she would be a permanent resident on her way to citizenship, like that, and it would have been nowhere near as painful. So and the thing is, she could be a Mexican American, she could be a Black American, she could be a French American, but as long as she has American citizenship, we play favourites with the Yanks or the Brits or whatever. But as soon
Or
as you're
find
from
out
another country, but as soon
like
as you're from another country, like if
Palestinian and get it. Which is
well, okay, if she was from Brazil, so I've dated around a little bit. I've dated other people from other countries. So I had a Russian girlfriend in the past. Australia doesn't like Russians. It's hard to get citizenship or permanent residency as a Russian, or a Belarusian, or a Ukrainian, or a Brazilian, or a Colombian,
well,
because
Ukraine's
we play.
in vogue right now.
Well,
That
it's
one was
in vogue now,
yeah.
but in the past it was a hassle and a half. We play favourites, and I'm like, well, hold on, why do we play favourites? If in my estimation is this, we have needs and skills in this country. We have critical roles in this country that need to be filled, especially in healthcare. Okay, we have we have busting at the seams problems in hospitals and dentistries and nurses. Yet
50,000 deficit in skilled trades right now too. They
you've got it. Now the thing is, when you're taking people from pools like the Philippines or Indonesia or your preferred countries, what you do is you diminish the pool that's available in those countries. So say for example, say Australia has got a preference of 30 countries, all right? Now, and we exclude the other 160 countries on planet Earth, all right? And say we've got 50,000 nurses and doctors we need to fill, all right? If we're only taking from the pool of those 30 countries, what we do is we diminish the effect of those roles have in those countries because we're pulling from only a very small pool of countries. Now, what happens is locally in those countries, the quality drops because the people aren't staying there, they're coming to Australia. Conversely, if there is a shortfall in those preferred countries, we're harmed because we can't fill those roles because we're not graduating enough doctors and nurses, and we're pooling from a pool that's already being picked up by other countries. So, say for example, we're competing against, say, France, Germany, Canada, America, and the UK. We're competing against those other countries, and you're asking people in those countries to say, choose us over America, where the taxes are half, or like doctors in America can earn $600,000 US a year, where they can only earn $200,000 Australian a year, and they pay half as much taxes, or it's cheaper. Okay, so what's your preference? Where are you going to go? You're going to go to Australia. You're going to go to America. Oh, I'm going to go to America. It's way easier. It's way cheaper. It's way more easy to get immigration. It's way more easy to get a job. Now, for example, here I met a guy who, as a dental surgeon, his citizenship is Iran. He spoke in national conferences in Germany and France and Spain. He would be in a lecture hall with 1,000 other doctors and dentists giving speeches as the key speaker for the night, yet he's a taxi driver in Australia because he's Iranian. And I'm
yeah.
like, we need dentists. There is a shortfall of dentists, and he lives in the Northern Territory, and yet he's a taxi driver. And I was like, are you insane? Are you insane? Because we play favourites. That's the Department of Immigration.
It's so we've got the DEI whole thing going on,
Yep.
but then we've still got all these like
Yep.
nationalist policies which are impeding
Yep.
legitimate inclusion of
Yep.
someone who is diverse.
Yep.
But simultaneously, there's also the immigration issue where we've got, like so many immigrants here. But then, so that's an interesting point too. Like, so there's what are your thoughts on that, on the quantity of immigration?
So the thing is, like, Australia, we are a multicultural society. Actually, no, I hate to say the term because
Yeah,
I
it's a
hate the term
loaded term.
multicultural. It's terrible because it implies a level of integration that is not necessarily obvious in Australia. We are ethnically diverse.
Yep.
That is probably a more accurate term. Australia is very ethnically diverse, culturally and ethnically. Now, and I'm okay with that. We've got a lot of people from, obviously, I've got a wife from Tunisia. A lot of my friends are Greek, Italian, French. I've got a lot of friends from places I've.
You're a terrible extremist.
I'm a terrible extremist. I'm shocking. I've worked all around the world. I've worked in places like the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo. One of my closest friends is a Congolese man who I worked with. He's great. I've got African American friends in the United States who I absolutely adore. They're awesome people. I've got friends who are indigenous in Australia. My dad's side of the family has like I'm a mixed race, so I've got indigenous in me. I know it's not plainly obvious. I don't tick the box, are you Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander? I'm not, because I don't have the
Identify
same.
like you. Yeah, I
Well,
understand.
I lived in communities, but it wasn't like I lived as an indigenous person in indigenous communities.
Sure,
So it's about a whole
but
it's
you
a
have
whole slew of
some DNA
yeah,
heritage, and
look,
yep,
and a lot of Australians do. A lot of Australians do.
yeah,
Now, for me personally, the goalposts or the benchmarks for what it means to be one race or another, I think is such a stupid argument. And the reason why it's stupid is you go to other countries. I went to Brazil a number of years ago, and Brazil, you ask people like all colors, like from light to dark, um, and you ask them about their ethnic backgrounds, and they do not know and they do not care. They do not care. And it's remarkably refreshing to see a developing country like Brazil do not give a rat's ass about the color of skin. It is so nice. And there's a lot of other countries I've been to who do not care.
it's a non-issue. Hey,
It's such a stupid thing to argue about. Who cares? The libertarians, it's who cares? We don't care, and I don't understand why it's so common in the narrative of Australians to kick it's
yeah,
beyond insane. It's the same thing as like when we're talking about I can't help but laugh at this when you see people come out and saying, "Oh, I'm gay." I don't care.
yeah,
Who
yeah.
cares?
And but according to the current like thing that you should do is that it's mandatory that you celebrate them for coming out as whatever in the alphabet string.
It's as idiotic as when I see people say these minor celebrities who get up on their lectern and they say, I'm quitting being a musician. This is not an airport. We do not need a embarkation or disembarkation call every time you do something with your life. We don't care. And I don't know why that Australians, in the social conscience of Australia, we give a rat's ass about any of that. It's not important. So the DEI narratives that we see so often is that I boil it down to something simple.
It's farcical, not genuine.
Yes, it is. It is a stupid thing to argue about.
Like if you diversity will just happen per chance.
We
To
okay.
enforce diversity, is it something like peculiar? Like what?
It's so much simpler than that. Like the libertarians believe in diversity of who you are as a person, a diversity of personality, diversity of temperament, diversity of skills. Okay, diversity of color is stupid. It's like arguing who's better, people with blue eyes or green eyes or brown eyes. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. The that's the libertarian
Yeah,
stake
there are
on it.
many phenotypes. Are we going to get diversity in all phenotypes?
Well, it's how much do you want to really like separate tribes and pit them against one another? It is it is the new age of class warfare, okay? And it is reductionist. It is nonsense. It
It's also
takes us to
impossible.
nowhere.
It's
It takes us to nowhere. It takes us
equally
as a
impossible.
society nowhere good. Okay,
Yeah.
nowhere good. There's no net outcome that's good from this. And unfortunately, the left in Australia is likes to create nonsense and then put it into the public dialogue, argue about it, and create struggle out of nothing. It's nothing. And when you see ABC talk about diversity quotas and stuff, all you create is people getting pissed off about nonsense issues.
There's a line: equality of opportunity, not
Uh,
equality of outcome. What I'm hearing you say is that there's so libertarians believe in the removal of impediments, so then everyone is on an equal opportunity
yes,
playing field,
correct.
and if you just remove those impediments, then diversity and that will just happen because the impediments are not there.
Yeah, so and I hate to point to other figures. Jordan Peterson has spoken about this at length. I know he's hated by ABC. I know he's hated by the left, and he's been called all sorts of names under the sun. But he's talked about diversity in opportunity versus outcome. The reality is, libertarians fundamentally believe that humans have individual rights and abilities and skills. There should be no judgment on that person based on their immutable characteristics, i.e., their hair, their color, their skin, their race, their ethnicity, the creed. Like, it's nonsense. It's all about merit. Now, this goes back to the Department of Immigration and what I was saying about migration. We shouldn't care. We shouldn't have a preferred nations list of countries that we choose from to pull skills from. Okay, as far as I can see, the only human race on Earth is what we've got. There's only one human race. Okay, I don't know why we pick sides on which countries we prefer over other. It's arbitrary lines in the sand. It's such a dumb thing. Well, this human, because he was born on this side of the line, is something we can't take, but on this side of the line we can. What the hell? It's dumb. Now, the DEI stuff is exactly that. It's basically drawing lines in the sand, these fantasy artificial lines in the sand, and picking sides.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
There's only one human race. Like, I don't care who you are. You're a human. You have inalienable human rights. You have abilities. You have a brain. You have eyes. You have hands. You have skills. Now, in Australia, we have needs. As a society, we have jobs that we need to fill. We have skills that we're short on. We shouldn't restrict it to 30 countries that we have a preferred. We should be pulling from everybody. We should be opening it up to whoever wants, who fits the needs that we've got. Now, at the same time, I also don't believe that we need an influx of people who do not meet our values. Now,
interesting.
The values thing is important. So, as an Australian, as a culture, as an Australian country, we have skills we have certain minimum requirements, i.e., speaking English. I think now that's not racist. The fact is, the cultural core of Australia are English speakers. Most of employers are English-speaking employers. Government agencies, even though they try to help with translators and interpreters, they're mostly English-speaking. Our signs are all English. Our business cards are all English. Okay, so
speak English.
It's very hard to be Australian or in Australia if you can't speak English or even have a basic understanding.
And then you're relying on welfare if you can't work.
The other thing as well is that we have certain educational or skill-based requirements for employment. All right. Now, I think there's no point opening the gates to 50,000 Syrian refugees that can't speak the language, don't understand the culture, don't have the skills to work even in the most basic menial job in this country, don't understand our society, don't understand any. There's no point bringing 50,000 refugees into the country who have no capacity to even operate or exist in the country. That's just silly. Okay, but then if you've got a person who speaks 5 languages, fluent in English, and is a doctor, but just because he's from Iran, we're going to say no. Doesn't make any sense. That's dumb.
Yeah. So if the competency is there, the skill set, and then there's just government impediments for no reason. And we spoke the other day about the potential for less difficult. So there are some legitimate issues, like if you're a lawyer in another country, like Australian law is different. So you have to do, and medicine, the medicines that we use are slightly different to the medicines in other countries. So you have to do some sort of
bridging. A lot of countries, not just Australia, but a lot of countries do bridging, or they do cross-cultural training, and then that can even begin completely. We live in a digital age. That can begin even in their own country. Okay, that can begin then. But the reality is that I'm not against immigration. I think immigration is important to this country, especially if you meet the minimum requirements for being able to work and live in this country, but also how you integrate with society. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I also think that influxing a whole bunch of people who can't speak the language, don't understand the culture is also silly. It's a recipe for disaster. We've seen this. We've seen this effect happen in places like France, when we had millions of sub-Saharan Africans and Middle Easterners from Syria and others and Afghanistan flood into France. They have no idea what the culture's like.
And the criminal issues like that we're seeing,
yes,
like, that is not
because
why, and no one wants to say it, but then you just look at the stats and it's like it's people from third world countries coming in and stabbing people with knives and taking their money. Like, it's so if you commit a crime, go you adios. See, go
well,
back.
that's the thing as well. We import people because we care. Now, look,
Which is lovely, but then if you stab an Australian, see you later.
it should be that way. Exactly, it should be as clear cut as that. Unfortunately, it's not. And look, I believe that it is imperative for Australia as to do the necessary checks and balances, i.e., do you speak our language? Do you understand what it means to be Australian? Do you understand the way that we structure our government?
Yep.
That's important stuff. Do you understand how, like, we function as a society? If you even have the most barest understanding and you have the skills to be able to have a job, pay taxes, and operate, then great. You should be able to come here, regardless of where you're from. But if you're a criminal from Venezuela and you fled Venezuela because of the government's policies, and then you're claiming economic asylum in Australia, and then you're going to commit crimes here in Australia, no, you should go back to Venezuela. We don't want you here. Piss off. Go away. Unfortunately, what we've seen is, I think the Albanese government has imported, I think it's 1 million people in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Something to that effect. And a lot of the people who are here, not all, but a lot of the people who are here are living on welfare in government-assisted housing. So, like, my argument is, so they've put a strain on the economy.
What's the libertarian stance on this? Like, and I mean,
Well,
my concern is that, I mean, I've got mates who are immigrants, and there's in business advice. Well, that's an interesting thing. A lot of immigrants, legitimate immigrants, start businesses, and there's an inordinate, a disproportionate amount of immigrants who start businesses because they're very, they've just got that, especially like all around the world. So that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant.
I'll give an example. So during the Vietnamese conflict, there were farmers who were displaced during the Viet Cong era and the move of communism from north to south in Vietnam, and the conflict that arose when the US involved themselves. There were farmers, okay, who were displaced by war in Vietnam. They fled to Australia, places like Darwin, North Queensland, and others. And guess what they did?
I met one today. Remember? Yep.
And guess what? They created farms in Australia. Okay. Now, most of them couldn't speak English at the time that they fled under refugee status. But at the time that they fled, the Australian government did checks. What were you doing? I was a farmer. I grew this, blah, 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 blah. And they had an understanding, and they're like, well, will you take English classes? Yes, I will. I'll do the English classes. So there were programs in place where we went, okay, refugee, no worries, cool. You've got necessary skills. Australia needed farmers. We need people to work the land. Yeah, no worries. We always need that. And they did the English classes. So a lot of Vietnamese who fled out of Vietnam, guess what? They went to school, they got educations, they spoke English, they contributed to our society, they integrated into the Australian fabric, the tapestry of Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they did that. The Greeks did that after World War II. A lot of Greeks couldn't speak English.
Or the Italians.
They came to Australia, or the Italians. They came to Australia to flee communism, Marxism, and fascism. World War II, or they came in the aftermath of the destruction of World War II. They came to Australia, could not speak English. Guess what? They learned English. They sent their kids to English schools. They grew businesses. That has worked forever. Now we get to the modern age where we've got a lot of cultures who are very entrenched, either ideologically, religiously, who do not want to change, and the Australian government is bringing them here, knowing full well they do not want to integrate, they do not want to learn the language, they do not want to adapt, they do not want to send their kids to English schools or mix with other kids, okay? And that has only happened mostly very recently. There are segments of our society that do not want to partake in Australia, but they're here.
Interesting, yeah.
And we're seeing the effect of this happening in America, we're seeing it in Canada, and we're seeing it in the UK, France, and Germany. In the UK is a perfect example where you've got whole areas that are basically becoming, I hate to say it, but Middle Eastern slums, full of crime, and like you see like all the grooming gangs in the UK, and they're perpetrated by, I'm gonna point the finger, and I'm gonna get some shit on this, but like you got the Pakistani grooming gangs. I've got friends who are Pakistani, but
Yep.
then you've got some groups that are very hardcore, where they're raping kids in England, and the government, because
And
it doesn't want to,
you're not allowed to say that because it looks you might be bad, but it's okay to go on national TV and demonize white boys for being misogynist.
look every country.
but gangs of like literal gang rape. You can't.
Yes.
Oh, we don't want to be offensive, but we can pick on the white 13-year-old boy. Like
No, honestly, Australia, like all other countries, especially, I would say white majority countries. Australia is part of the white majority countries.
Yep,
And as I said, I don't really care about the color thing. The color thing is not a thing. It's a cultural thing, and this is what I want to hone in on. Okay, you can be any color of any persuasion from any country in the world. Like
yeah,
I've met people from other countries who will think, "Oh wow, you're remarkably whiter than I would have thought." Okay, it happens. So the color aside, it's got nothing to do with it, but it's the culture. So there are certain elements, there are certain bad eggs in certain countries that do not integrate, or will not integrate, or don't want to integrate at all. And in the UK, we're seeing an element of the Pakistani community. You got some Pakistanis who are great; they're awesome. They open up shops. You go and visit them. They're awesome people. But then you got some elements.
The Pakistani bloke who's a key member of our group, and he's more Aussie than me.
But then I've met some other people who are like, holy crap. But then again, at the same time, I've met some whites who are very colourful in some of the stuff that they say, and I go, holy crap.
Yeah.
So, and some of the crime that I've seen committed by, like,
there should be a thing of like I've got my wog. I just said it I've got an Italian mate, and I give him shit for being a wog.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not gonna it's not. I'm not saying it to
derogatory.
I think of him as less than me. Yep. I'm saying it because that's the Australian thing. Because I love him and I don't think of him as worse. I give him shit by calling him a wog. But but that's the endearment. Like it's not
Well, Australian mateship for the most part is one built around, I guess, teasing, embarrassment, picking on.
It's a sign of respect. Like if you don't trust someone, then you don't tease them for their differences.
Correct. Yeah. Well, that's part of it. I think it also builds in a level of resiliency. So if I get called by my mates, all sorts of things, when I get called by a stranger, it doesn't faze me so much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
but the racial element of one of the things that bothers me about being a conservative or being a libertarian or sitting on that side of the fence in Australia, especially growing up in the NT for a long time, you hear from the other side, from the left predominantly, you get called a racist, and it's like, well, that's really, really funny. It's really hilarious because when I look at my dating history, the person I married, most of the women I've dated have been from other countries. My wife is from Africa, North Africa, so it's really funny. And then
friendships,
my neighbors, Well, exactly. So, like, my girlfriend from high school was Greek. My neighbour's Greek. The other guy that lives next to me is Vietnamese. The lady around the corner, she's Chinese. Like, I live in a very ethnically diverse neighbourhood. I went to school in a very ethnically diverse school. I lived in Aboriginal communities, so I was the one white kid amongst all the indigenous kids.
Yeah.
And you want to call me a racist? And the person who's calling me a racist is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little twerp who's lived in inner-city Melbourne his entire life. And I'm like, what were your family? Oh, my family's all British through and through, 100% white the whole way through. Well, and you're calling me the racist? That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Piss off.
Well, we've got this hierarchy, like this inverted thing at the oppression hierarchy right now. So if you've got a disability, you're black, woman, you're at the top of the persecution pyramid, and if you're a white man, heterosexual, Christian, you are the worst evil person ever by your attributes. But that is racism.
Well, I'll give you something. I'll give you something food for thought. Okay, so this is really, really funny. So even though I've worked in small business for a number of years, and I've worked in the corporate sector, I've worked in the government sector. One of my jobs from 2016 to 2022 was I've always had a passion for photography. Okay, I know we're going a little bit off topic here, but I've been a passionate photographer for about 20 years, and I've done all sorts of photography, weddings, events, everything. But then from 2016 to 2022, I was the principal photographer at a gay nightclub.
Right.
So the only gay and lesbian nightclub in Darwin, which was Throb Nightclub, I was the principal photographer for. And the two gay men, so one is a full white guy as far as I'm aware, and the other one is half Greek, half Japanese. The two owners who owned Throb Nightclub, who also ran a lifestyle magazine, and they were very connected to the community, and I've got friends in the LGBT community and the drag queen community. So like, it's the funniest thing being called a homophobe or a racist or a sexist, and it's wow, my transgender friends in the LGBT community might have something to say about that.
Yeah, and that's
it's just nonsense.
That's the liberal, like that's a genuine, or the original idea of the Christian liberal thing is that you can be personally Christian, personally conservative, embrace those religious ideals for yourself, and say I choose to live by these set of rules. But then another person who they don't embrace Christianity and they have that, but we can live side by side and not kill each other. But so that's a novel idea in Australia, and that's a Christian Western idea, or a Christian liberal idea, right? Where in Pakistan, maybe most places in Pakistan, if you're gay, you could very well be stoned to death.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's okay. So this is going to get really, really gnarly, I think. There is the concept around what is homosexual is not as clearly defined in some countries than it is in Australia.
Sure.
Okay, for example, so in the country of Tunisia, so this is according to my wife. Now, if you have sex, if you're a man and you have sex with another man, if you're on the receiving end, if you're the bottom, you are gay. But if you're the one that is doing the top, you are not.
I think I've heard of that in prison culture in Australia. So like, yeah, wow.
So homosexuality is not like here. If I shag another bloke, I'm gay. Whether I'm on the top or the bottom, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, that's the one I'd go with.
That's how we classically define it. Essentially sodomy. Now, but in Tunisia, it's only on the receiving end. If I'm the receiving end, I'm the gay guy. Now in Pakistan, from what I understand, it's the same. Now here's the other split. There was an investigation that was done, I believe, by either the BBC or another organisation, where what qualifies as sex or whatever in Pakistan has certain different metrics.
Sure.
Now, for example, if I'm an adult man in Pakistan, and I rape a 6-year-old street kid, boy or girl, it doesn't matter. Not joking. So I'm not gay for raping a 6-year-old street kid, boy. I'm not gay.
Wow.
He is, but not me.
That's so unusual for like.
It's to the Western mind. It's weird.
Yeah.
But it's what's practiced.
Yeah.
So
it's incompatible with Australian culture.
It's incompatible because, see, every culture has different unique cultural qualities on how their point of view, and it's shared uniformly in the culture. Now, in Western society, we're willing to adopt or apologize for a whole smattering of different beliefs. We inculcate and group up and throw things at the wall and hope it sticks. But in some cultures, it doesn't fly. Certain very homogenous societies, there are certain metrics or goalposts to what qualifies what, to meaning what.
Yeah.
So
even in our culture, like homosexuality was something you did, not something you were. Like it was a verb, not a noun. Like it's only really in the last 50 years that it's become a noun, not a verb? Like,
Well, okay, for example, so this is something that's practiced in a lot of Middle Eastern cultures, for example. So like, talking gay or homosexual, like in Turkey, for example, if I commit a crime and it's a significant crime, the male police officers can rape me, but they're not gay. I go to authorities to report a crime and they rape me. I'm the gay guy, not them.
yeah, right.
It happens. It happens in Palestine. It happens in a lot of Middle Eastern countries. It happens in Egypt. The Western labeling doesn't always fit.
Yeah,
And
we've covered this with a few. Like when we're using certain words, left wing, right wing, fascist, Nazi, like Elon Musk is a Nazi. Well, no, he's not, and he's not a fascist either. He's a libertarian. Like
he's a libertarian. Well, as I said, the classical definition of fascism, the Giovanni Gentile qualification for fascism, is there's no individual before the state, i.e. the state is the most important thing,
Sure.
full stop, end of discussion. So when you got people like Elon Musk coming up and saying the government's too big, it's too burdensome, it's too onerous, we need to...
It's the opposite to fascism. It's the opposite to Nazism.
I hate the term anti-fascist because it comes from Marxists,
it sounds like
who all believe in big government too.
It's the opposite.
The libertarian philosophy is government doesn't equal good. Get rid of it. Yeah. So we look at things very
mitigate it. Yeah,
it's very binary. It's like, is this good? Yes or no. Is it? If it's not good, why do we still have it? Get rid of it. That's essentially very classically libertarian. And Javier Milei in Argentina recognized this both as a politician, as an economist. He looked at Department of Education. Was it a net good for society? No. What did he do? He gutted it.
Yeah.
Elon Musk, same, gut it. Like, and Donald Trump, for all his faults, there are a lot of things that is going on. As you said before, 400 government organizations, more government organizations than the years that the US has existed for. Like, there are organizations in the United States, like there was one that was a supplementary department for the Department of Agriculture that was specialized in looking at DEI, transgender, LGBT qualities of farmers. Like, and they were all funded by the government to make sure that diversity training was happening with farmers and to make sure gay cowboys could find gay other cowboys to be in relationships with. It's like, are you serious? There was a whole department on this? That's nuts. So the libertarian philosophy, who does this serve? Nobody. How much does it cost? A lot. Time to get rid of it.
Yeah.
That's the simple thing. So for the libertarians, going back to core policies, so for example, Department of Climate Change, we would gut it, scrap it, it would be gone tomorrow. It costs a lot, it does nothing. Why? Well, okay, let's look at it. One of the biggest lies that's perpetrated on the Australian people around climate change or around pollution, let's clarify, CO2 is not a pollutant. It is not. It is not. Okay? At the very core thing, CO2 is a net good for society. It is plant food. It is a necessary requirement for photosynthesis. It is one of three major components: water, CO2, sunlight. Okay? It is critically important. Get this. The Australian total production of just CO2 is a net negative compared to the total absorption of CO2 by all plant life in Australia. Is that a surprise? No, it shouldn't be, because we've got billions of trees and grasses and bushes and everything in Australia. And when you look at the total, okay, to give you an example, just the Daintree rainforest in North Queensland absorbs more CO2 than Australia produces yearly. Just the Daintree, yearly. Okay, when you factor in all of Australian trees across the entire country, Australia is a CO2 sink. It sucks in more than we produce as a country. Yet the climate change, the Department of Climate Change, and all the green energy nonsense that Australians spruik, or that side of politics spruik, is that we are causing dramatic climate change, disastrous outcomes, weather, blah, blah, blah. When you look at the OECD reports for the last 100 years, when you look at every single metric around adverse weather events that cause death, they have been at a net decline. So when you look at winds, wildfires, rain, snow, tornadoes, hurricanes, everything, more people died 100 years ago, on average, than they do now. It is down. It's down like 99%. Okay,
Gerard
more
Rennick's
people.
done some great work. Yeah, do you follow Gerard Rennick?
I do. I do.
He's done some great work bringing out some of the data on this and
Yep.
challenging them in.
Well, the perfect one is the IPCC are liars. Okay, when the IPCC was first founded with Margaret Thatcher, it was filled with scientists, like 40 or 50 scientists, some of the world leading scientists in the world. The IPCC now is full with pseudoscientists and people who come from the arts. There's no scientists or very few scientists part of the IPCC now. Now, the IPCC, when it was in its last iteration of their reports regarding what qualifies as climate change and adverse weather, basically said any weather that is unusual than the norm. That was the qualification. So it's like, okay, the temperature today in Brisbane was 1 degree cooler this year today than it was than the previous year and the previous year. Okay, to the IPCC and the climate change people, that's climate change because it's 1 degree cooler than the norm. That is ludicrous. Just because now, when you look at cyclones and weather events, like cyclone, what was the last one we had that you guys had in Queensland? It was Cyclone Alfred.
Yeah.
Okay, that was unusual. No, Queensland is subtropical. It gets cyclones.
Yeah, and and
It's been a while since you got one this close.
Yeah, and it was effectively a non-issue,
but it blew out.
Like, to play devil's advocate or get the dialectic on this, so it's part of the role of government is regulation. So, like, this is an obvious one where it's gone too far, but there are some good ones, like aviation and
Yep,
car safety and policing. So defund the police. Your father's a police officer. Do you want to put all the police and defund all of the police?
It's nonsense because the police serve a multifunctional role in society. Besides enforcing to essentially protect individuals and enforcing laws, they also act as a way to or essentially control bad behavior. Okay. The problem is the knowledge of police existing versus the actual physical presence of police is two different things. Now, unfortunately, Australia has moved away from the physical appearance of police to a kind of an ethereal quality that police do exist. That is bad. Because what happens is crime increases because the presence of police, the optics of police, do not exist, other than what you see on the TV, which is kind of retarded. You want to see police present as frequently as possible because it gives them
general.
Well, it goes back to the notion of the broken windows theory. If you live in a society, a suburb or area where all the windows are smashed, then the likelihood of me wanting to smash windows, create crime, is higher. If you create the optics of a safe civil society whereby there is a police officer at arm's length, someone that's close by that can save me or create law and order, that's good. That's a net positive. Irrespective of him actually doing anything, it's the optics of it happening. So that's the two different things. Yeah. Now,
and where police are putting their time is actually something I've seen is where, so looking on a macro level, like we've seen in the UK, where there's something like 20,000 arrests and imprisonments over social hate posts. Like, so there's no actual violence. There's it's a publication on a social media, on a website where it's interpreted to be a racist or
So see, this is why
but then
free speech,
an actual violent crime is not deterred and prosecuted. And I've seen that in Australia firsthand. But I don't think that's so much of an issue of police. It's bad laws.
And political jockeying or pulling the strings, basically being puppet masters. It's not happening as widely here in Australia as what's happening in the UK. The UK's lost its mind.
I've seen,
but it did start
too, right? Like, where things that should be arrested, or where, like, if the color of their skin. So I've got friends and clients from many years ago, so who were like I'm thinking of an Aboriginal man. I won't say his name, obviously, but who committed a violent crime. It was pretty bad, but he served 10 years for it for something that was. I mean, today he would. If a white man did that today, he might get 5 years. But then if an Aboriginal man today so we've got the Aboriginal discount in laws in Queensland, and so I've seen this firsthand where the color of skin will dramatically determine the length of prison time, and then or even prosecution whatsoever, and gender as well. So gender's 7 times more than race even.
Yeah.
So we've got this.
It's
really peculiar.
So the libertarian philosophy, as I said 3 or 4 times prior, is that boil humans down to the fact that they are just human. We don't care about the color of the skin. We don't care what's dangling between their legs. If you commit, so by the metrics of who you are or what you've done or anything, it is the fact that one person has done one bad thing to another person or whatever.
Yep. Regardless of the perpetrator or the victim, like
you got it.
It shouldn't matter, right? Like, I mean, that's
no. It's well, the thing is, the old adage of what is it? The law should be blind and deaf to all of the other
phenotypes,
the other nonsense qualities that make up who this person is. It should not be factored in.
Yeah.
Okay, the end of the discussion should be like, okay, whether you're a man, a woman, black, white, green, blue, Muslim, Christian, homosexual, whatever, if I killed this person, regardless of what this person looked like, is this person life imprisonment for the rest of their days. See you later, goodbye. Doesn't matter. It is as black and white as that.
Yep.
Now I know that removes some of the nuance around certain. Well, it should be very categorical in regards to punishment. Now, unfortunately, when you start playing favourites, when you start entering in,
Thomas Sowell calls it intertemporal cosmic justice. He goes, it's just not possible. Like, you can't compensate today for someone's what you think their grandparents suffered in the past so that they get clemency or increased punishments today or compensation for 3 generations ago.
Yeah. So this argument has been jockeyed around for years, and I look at it very matter-of-factly. You commit a crime. What was the crime? How was it done?
Yeah.
That is the determination for justice, not any other factor. Nothing else factors into this. Unfortunately, what we've done is, I remember reading a case where it was recently it was a number of years ago, where it was a 21-year-old who had a whole bunch of pedophilia on his computer, but because he was 21 living with mum and dad, he got nothing. He got a home detention for 12 months. I was like, great, so you're going to send him back to the same place that he was committing the crimes. Whoop-de-doo. No job, nothing. Versus a 47-year-old government worker who got 8 years in prison for the same thing. I was like, well, they were the same crime.
Yeah.
Like, I don't get it. Like, it's absolutely nonsense that we pick and choose favorites to who we need to
punish or not punish. Yeah, Lady Justice should be blind. Lady
Justice should be blind. You got it. And the libertarians' core philosophy is that humans are humans, and we don't care about all that immutable characteristic nonsense. We don't care about age, sex, gender, race, religion. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to us. And to get into the weeds over it is just, it's a recipe for disaster. It is reductionist nonsense, and all it does is create tribalism and warfare, and it leads society to bad places.
Yep. So I conflated 2 issues in that question earlier. So you don't believe in defunding the police. You believe in...
I do not.
Despite assertions by some. So Lady Justice should be blind. But so there is... So it's certainly over-regulated in some places, but...
Yes.
Some regulation is really good. So what level of regulation should the government impose?
In regards to, specifically?
Well, yeah, I think I brought up earlier, like aviation, or like someone who's okay. So a company. Okay, you're a chemical engineer. We build a nuclear plant, and then the nuclear plant is tipping toxic nuclear waste into the river. You know, I mean, that's not going to happen. But for the thought experiment, if they're doing that, well, so I'm sure your opponents would argue that if we've reduced government down to nothing, that corporations are going to do that, maximize profits, and kill all the local wildlife. And we've seen it with like, you know, legitimate example, like with the Murray River, with farmers pulling too much water out of the Murray, and you know, so with regulation, it should be minimal. I agree. At what level? That's a really tough question, right?
Oversight, investigation is important in any society because it puts regulatory checks and balances in place. So, for example, we set minimum standards. Fortunately, Australia sets some of the best standards for, like, I've worked in the mining sector, I've worked in oil and gas. So in regards to environmental management or land care, we have some of the best standards in the world, full stop.
Yeah.
Now,
CSIRO have, like, you look at some of their wins over the years.
Sure.
Incredible, like Wi-Fi, like some of their agriculture stuff.
But
like,
here's the funny thing that's not. Here's the funny thing that's not talked about often enough. Yes, there are government departments, EPA, CSIRO, and others, who've pushed for regulatory frameworks around how to manage or essentially conserve the environment that we're working in or living in. But here's the other thing is a lot of private investors, money coming from people who put their own dollars into these organizations, who care about the water and land that they live on or they operate on or they work in, also set those standards. They say, we want to make sure that this land, the air we breathe, the water we drink, is clean and healthy. So yes, the government departments have something to say about this, but the majority of it, the majority of the framework or the occupational work health safety on the mines came from private investors, because the private investors, the people who sit on the boards, want a couple of things. They want, obviously, safe working environments, not because of the unions, not because of the government frameworks, because they wanted to make sure that if their workers weren't getting injured or killed, they weren't getting sued into oblivion. Okay? Yeah. Because fortunately in the private sector, and this is never talked about enough, the private sector has enough mechanisms and recourses whereby if a private agency or industry does something wrong, they can get sued to oblivion by another private sector. All right? Without the government coming down. Sometimes even the government isn't even aware that it's gone on before it's brought to bear by a law firm who sues them on a class action. And the government goes, hey, we didn't know about that. So most of the mechanisms around safety and authority and environmental standards has come from the private sector more so than from government. Now, I'll give you an example. Go back 100 years, Henry Ford, when he created the production line of Ford, he set the 5-day work week. He set some of the very early standards in regards, because he saw guys working on the production line losing their hands to equipment, and he was like, oh, I don't like.
He would set up the production line. So if a guy had his right arm amputated, another guy they would pair them up. He had a blind guy. They had a team of 5 working on the nuts and bolts.
Yep.
And he got one blind guy, but he had exceptional dexterity because he was visually impaired.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to do the work of a couple of the men. He was incredible, like with using people with unusual disabilities. And
it's the same thing when you look at private enterprise. So private enterprise, because they want to sell a better product, because their business model follows consumer happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if a consumer is happy with a product, they will buy my product, and if my product is better than the other guy's product, guess what? The consumers are more happy with my product, they will buy my product. Now, we go back to, say, the 1950s. Before the 1960s even, seatbelts weren't a thing in cars. Okay, what happened was, as cars were getting more powerful and faster and more people were buying cars, what was happening was people were getting killed in motor vehicle accidents because there was no safety mechanisms within the vehicles. What did Chevrolet do? What did Ford do? They went, and GM. They basically said, maybe we need to put in something like what the racing car guys use, which were harnesses. They put in seatbelts, and then driver mortality dropped. The government went, that's a good idea. We should do something about that. The government were the last to to the table. It was the private industry that did that. The same thing goes when it comes to environmental standards or the taking up of new technology in the mining sector. A great one, I'll talk about something very recently. In coal-fired power plants, the government put down stipulations in the United States and the UK about all of the fumes and particulates that were being pumped out of coal-fired stations.
With the prostatic precipitators in the
Yeah.
forms, yeah.
Yeah, so they put in like in the flue stacks, they put in reclamators similar to like your what is it in your car's exhaust system to capture the particulates, to separate and to make sure that nothing came out that was hazardous. Now, the government said we would like you to see a reduction in this. This is what the government said. What did the private corporates say? They said, oh, you know, that's a really, really good idea. And they're the ones that came up with the solutions. The government didn't have the solutions. They just said, we would like to see a reduction.
Yeah.
So what did the private sector do? And when the private sector reduced the emissions and they reduced all the particulates in the air quality improved for the coal mines, the coal production, and the cities that were surrounding them. So people's livelihoods got better, and that was the natural result of it. The private sector is the major driving force in climate and change, especially ones that care about it, especially if you've got like workforces that live and work in those areas. Now, it's a little bit different when you've got organizations like China. Some of the Chinese private organizations or government organizations, because they're government organizations, they don't care. They've got no care factor. Now, as I said, private industry do care. Government does not care, okay, because there's nothing before the state. Now, in China, for example, when they produce solar panels, they will happily flush hydrochloric acid and acetylene chlorides and phosphors into their river systems, and then people downriver drink the poison and they get sick and die. That happens in China. You look at the expose that was done by on 60 Minutes, I think, or about the electric lithium stuff that's happening in Indonesia by China. Okay, that big expose that happened a couple of weeks ago. They don't care about air quality or safety mechanisms because guess what? They're a government-run organisation. They don't care. They don't care. They've got quotas to meet, and if people die, people die. If the environment gets destroyed, the environment gets destroyed. It don't matter. Governments do not care, but the private industry absolutely do care.
Yeah, interesting.
So back to what you were saying before about a nuclear plant. If the nuclear plant is operating in Australia, employing locals, and funded by local investors, it will not happen, irrespective of what the government say, because there is an optics view of we want to produce clean, abundant energy safely. So it wouldn't happen. The same thing goes with the aviation industry. So the Civil Aviation Safety Authority in Australia has the most strictest regulatory framework around pilot qualifications, training, and outcomes than any other aviation authority on planet Earth, even the FAA or the EASA in Europe.
Yeah.
So the pilots that come out of our training programs in Australia are of the highest quality. That's why for the entire existence of Australian aviation, there has been not one major jet airline that's ever crashed.
And so the
standards are so high.
You is to not to decrease that. You wouldn't even touch that. It would just continue as is. There's an industry body, a peak body that exists, and all those companies are a member of the peak body, and they're sharing data and information, and so there's like a degree of self-regulation. And I guess there's like when there is a breach of that, like if you've got a rogue player, then government might be able to step in, or police.
The major problem I have with government agencies is most of the people who are executives in government agencies who are orchestrating or making these policies are not from the industry they're making policies on. So
maybe like the peak body is just making a referral to a AFP, and then so that would still exist in a libertarian.
Well, the better way is to make a framework in conjunction with the major organisation, the major players, privately, who are doing business in the country that you're governing, because they will set a standard, and they say, you say to them, what is the ideal standard? What is the ideal standard for what you want, and where's the realistic outcomes for that standard. And then somewhere in the middle, you can come to a negotiated responsibility, or basically going, we're happy with this as the minimum for what we're happy with, and anything above that is just gravy. Now, the government goes, here's the framework for private organisation, and then other private organisations who want to compete also go, well, that's the framework. We're competing with other people who are also abiding by that framework. That's fine.
And it's an appropriate amount of red tape without onerous red tape that is unnecessarily stopping for it. It's a regulation that exists to appear to be good, but isn't actually doing anything of value.
The problem is some government policies or programs or platforms are so onerous, or they're so unfair, or they're so unreal that it goes,
or ideological.
It's just not. Yeah, it's ideologically slanted, and it's just not possible, or it's not realistic to expect that from a private organisation. Well, the net zero thing is ridiculous, because back to what I was saying with the net zero, Australia is a carbon sink. We don't produce vast quantities of CO2 more so than what Australia has the capacity to absorb through our native fauna. So it's like, okay, so well, technically we're at net zero now. We're actually at net negative now. So what's the reason behind this push towards net zero when you look at the pure science, we're at net negative now? So I don't understand it. But yet billions will flood into more net zero projects when we're already at net negative. I don't get it. And the framework around it is retarded.
And Rennick pointed out that like what's the actual criteria, and then they came back and said, well, there's multiple frameworks and none of the frameworks line up, so there's no actual way to determine whether we're hitting the target or not, because there's no defined. Was like the issue we were saying earlier with words. If we can't settle on a definition, or we don't know where we are, then how do we know if we actually get to zero or?
Exactly. Well, here's another one. So what's his name? The Libertarian Party of the Republican Party in America. What's his name? He's the Libertarian in the Republican Party. He's a senator. I can't think of his name. But he was asking questions of a whole panel of experts from government sectors about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which I thought was hilarious. And he asked them one by one. He said, you are the panel of experts from government departments, what is the CO2 level in the atmosphere? And one was like 5%, another one was said 50%, another one said 25%. And he's like, it's 0.04, you idiots.
Oh, that's oxygen, like nitrogen. Like all the air is nitrogen, is 79%, and then 21%, and then it's I didn't even know.
And all of them, it was 400 parts per million, and it was 0.04%. But he asked all of this panel of people who are experts at writing policy around climate change, and he said one by one, he said, what is the percentage? And they basically said, one guy said 25, one other one said 50%. I'm like, so it's worse than Venus. And it is 0.4%, and it was 0.04%. And so when you look at governments, these people, they get qualifications. I get a degree in political science. Okay, I'm not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. I don't have any understanding of chemistry. And then they rise through the ranks of the executive departments in government. That's all they've ever done. They've absorbed and digested government policy for their entire life. They live in a little bubble in their existence. They don't know what science is. They wouldn't even know like what even constitutes what water is made up of. That have some sort of vague understanding. And then when you ask them what CO2 is, they go, it's on the periodic table, or it's some evil gas that's a pollutant. No, it's not. They don't have an understanding of it. And then you expect them to write policy that has some sort of bearing or meaning in society? No, it's nonsense. And here's the funny thing is the pure science behind CO2 is this. If CO2 doubled tomorrow, you or I wouldn't even know about it. And even funny, if I get into the weeds and further, if you walk into a greenhouse where they have artificial light and they grow around the clock, the CO2, the standard CO2 that's in an artificial greenhouse is between 2,000 and 3,000 parts per million.
Right.
So to give you an example, it's between 6 to 8 times more CO2 than what you breathe right now.
Sure.
In a greenhouse. You can walk in and you go, hey, well, it's a greenhouse. It's all lush and beautiful, and you can breathe, no worries. It has no bearing on temperature. It has no bearing on pollution. It is a clear, odorless gas, and whether it's at 400 parts per million or 800 parts per million would have absolutely no bearing on you. The biggest bearing it would have is to how lush and green the world would look at that higher level. Now, for example, we know this by the geological record that if CO2 was double that it is right now, food on every farm, on every bit of dirt around the world would grow faster, stronger, and healthier, and be more free of disease and produce more food than it does right now. We, right now, at the base level, 400 parts per million, is all plants on Earth are starved. If we doubled it, if CO2 increased, life, the greenery of the Earth would actually get better.
Yeah.
It have no bearing on temperature.
I guess then there's the impact on temperature.
No bearing.
And well, part of the argument is the ocean. Like if the ocean goes up, 1 degree or whatever, then there's. I mean, some of the longitudinal models. Yeah, but I agree. There is an impact, but we're talking about such a. Yeah, yeah, I agree. Okay,
here's the problem with it.
Zero, but it's not. But it's at a point that it's like so you've got the Extinction Rebellionists, which are something like Antifa or anarchist.
Okay, so here's the thing. So the
extreme,
models, the computer models around climate science, or the modeling around what the effect of higher CO2 has on the world, are pretty much all wrong. And here's the reason why. So a physicist, a very well-known physicist named Freeman Dyson, he was a Princeton physicist, highly regarded. His associate was the man who did the mathematical modeling for all predictive climatology ever, that wrote the math for it. Now, he said in his doctorate for it, when he wrote the math, he said beyond a very short scope of between about 20 to 30 days, there was no way that you could create a model that would actively understand, replicate, or guess what weather will be like in a long-term period. It was impossible. So, and the thing is, all of the data centers that crunch the numbers in regards to climate modeling uses, guess what, his math. That he has said beyond 20 or 30 days, it is impossible to guess. It is a shot in the dark. So when I look at the IPCC, who use, guess what, his math, his science, and the modeling that's designed around his math to say in 100 years' time, this is what it's going to look like, is bullshit. It is lies, and it has been debunked by Freeman Dyson and the Princeton community for years. They've been screaming about it, saying before Freeman Dyson passed away a couple of years ago, he said it's nonsense. It's not possible. Yet, in the vernacular of the Extinction Rebellion, it is still used, and you've got people like so you've got deGrasse Tyson, and you've got others, and that idiot, what's his name, the TV engineer, what's his name? You've got Neil deGrasse Tyson, you've got others who are basically saying the climate modeling is right.
The scientist Greta Thunberg.
Well, the reality is the math doesn't support the estimations, the modeling that they keep spruiking. So the argument around it is nonsense. So when we look at the reality of it, when you look at CO2 as a compound, they've tested the infrared saturation of CO2 in controlled environments, and even when you triple, quadruple it, times it by 10, it doesn't absorb the same amount of latent heat as what you expect. But when you increase saturation of water, so it does, because water can be heated up, but CO2 can't.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
The chemical makeup doesn't support it. The methane does.
And where the tangible issue is, then like there's your net zero thing, and so they shut down coal-fired, like we're seeing in Europe, where they've shut down power stations, and gas supply, like with the whole drama with Russia and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you've got elderly people who are going without heat, and then they're dying of freezing to obtain a goal that isn't actually one. As Renix pointed out, we don't even know why are we doing this? Like when have we satisfied what they want, and then how many people need to die now to offset the future extinction that is purportedly going to happen? Like what are we actually, what are we trying to get to? Like what's the outcome?
I don't know. I think
that's wrong. I'm saying that rhetorically because I don't agree with it. But
you look at organisations like the Sustainable Australia Party. I got into a physical altercation. I was assaulted a couple of years ago by a Sustainable Australia party member because I asked him. I pointed out because he talked about climate change and he talked about human population. We're too populated, blah blah blah. And I asked him what he thoughts on it, and he was like, "We need to stop populating the world because we're a disease, we're a blight on the planet."
Oh man!
And I was like, "Well."
They say they're prepared to bring about extinction to us now because they think that we're going to cause extinction in the future, which is true.
It's just nonsense because these people have been so, I call it brainwashed. I think they've been brainwashed into thinking that humans are a disease, a venereal disease. It's ridiculous. And when you ask them, when you point out, well, you're a human, if it's so important that humans reduce the population, why don't you start with yourself? Be the lead on this, take charge and say, I'm going to sacrifice myself for the greater good of the world, and start with yourself. But the problem is, and the reason why you know they're hypocrites is because they always want other people to die for them.
Yep.
And this goes back to the very core of the very core. Yeah, because it's the argument of it's good for others to die for my benefit. And it is the most ridiculous, inane logic. The Antifa, the Extinction Rebellion, the climate Nazis, I call them climate Nazis because that's what they are. Frankly, if they're so worried about the environment and they're so worried about the population, they should start with themselves. And leave the rest of us alone, because I'm perfectly fine with what I do and how I live my life. But if they're so worried about that, start with themselves. And then, frankly, they'll be free of it, I'll be free of it, and everybody will be happy. Because they won't be here.
Yeah. That's wild. Here's just to continue with the controversy. So a lot of our members support One Nation. How are you guys? What's the juxtaposition between the Libertarian Party and One Nation?
Okay, so you got One Nation, you've got Jared Rennick's party, you've got Bob Katter's party that's sort of gone back and forth. You've had Clive Palmer, and now he's gone Trumpet of Patriots, and because it was the United Australia Party, I think at one point, and others. The problem is that all of these parties are essentially independents, because it's the party of the personality of the person that's running the show, and they've all structured the entire party around them. Now, here's the problem. What happens when those persons decide that they've had enough? They quit, they leave, they resign, they die. Okay, what happens to them then? The party goes away. Now, the reason why the Liberal National parties, the Coalition, the ALP and the Greens have persisted is because when you take away the key lead figure, like when Bob Brown finally packed it in and called it quits, the Greens didn't go away, even though it was the Bob Brown Greens party. All right?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, that's a good example. So what happens when Jared Rennick decides that after how many years in politics, he's had enough and he calls it quits and he see you later? What happens when Pauline Nation eventually decides that after 20 years barking at everybody that she's decided to pack it in? What happens to One Nation? One Nation goes away. Mm-hmm. The Libertarians is not a party based around the personality, essentially the cult of one person. It is a party built much like other parties that is going to be here. It's here now. It was here 15 years ago, and it'll be here in 15 years' time. And we're not a cult of personality. And I hate to use the cult of personality, but essentially that's what it is.
Yeah, yep. And my understanding is, so you guys were the Liberal Democrats, for those who don't.
We were. So
yeah.
In 2022, I ran second seat for Senate behind Sam McMahon, who was the former CLP senator for the Northern Territory. I was her second in the last federal election, and they went through a transformative name change and a structure between the last federal election and this one, mainly because the Liberal naming convention has some too many similarities and some negative connotations towards the Liberal National Committee. Plus, also the concept of liberal has some sort of negative fallover, and the name Democrat is too similar to the states.
Because you got So it implies progressive, like the American progressive politics.
Correct, and the Liberal Democrats, the Libertarians, wanted to distance themselves away from the naming convention and the misunderstanding. And unfortunately, because
there's a massive
it's funny.
People don't understand. I mean, the dictionary's got it wrong, so you can understand the confusion.
So the main problem is it's all about optics and how you get media traction, because the media essentially drives a lot of the values, narratives in this country, much like the United States. Now, the American system is a little bit simpler in the sense that the Democrats and the Republicans jockey for power, and it's basically a two-party system. Now, you have the Libertarians and you have independents, sure, why not? But usually, if you're going to get any traction, you join one of the two majors. But when you go outside of the republic model of the United States and you go into other democracies, like a lot of the European democracies, you get a whole slather of parties, much like what Australia has now. Now, with that being...
because we see some really constructive benefits from the independents or like the fringe parties pointing out like the duopoly, the issue of the duopoly. I see it as generally as a net positive.
So the ALP and the LNP, to my dismay, I think would prefer a US model, because for them kicking the can between the two parties is preferential than having to fight a whole bunch of independents and minor parties every election. It costs them less money. That they would much prefer a big unified one side versus a big unified the other than having to possibly have to go into a coalition with a whole bunch of independents and minors. And this is for both sides. And this is why Albanese, he says he wants to form government without the Greens. Okay? He would much prefer the Greens smattered through the ALP and the Greens to go away, much like the LNP would rather have Clive Palmer and One Nation all in their wings. But the problem is this, and I spent 17 years with the LNP, CLP in the Northern Territory. Towing the party line is one of kind of the promises you make if you're going to run. And unfortunately, even if the party line goes against the common, I would say, the common good of the people you're representing, you can't say anything against it. So this is what a lot of times you'll go and speak to an ALP rep or ALP member, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm not really a big fan of the way NDIS is structured or whatever, but he'll never say it publicly. Never ever. Yeah. Same thing goes with you go into the LNP camp. It's like, oh, I'm not really a big fan of the way.
Well, they're slightly better. I think the way their constitution is written, there's a little bit more freedom in the LNP than the ALP and the Greens, but it's still pretty.
There is, and here's the thing, it's a battle of ideology, because the ALP, because they have their roots in socialism, in the communist side of things, so there's nothing before the state. So the state over individual rights is the most important. So it's easy to buy into the logic of
the collective.
The party is the collective side is the most important thing. When the LNP side is, because they support, it's collectivism versus individualism. So on the LNP side, it's like, well, we're a big party of individuals. So it's much harder to clamp down an individual thought and speech on the right side than it is on the left side. And that's just because it's an ideological slant difference. That's it. So I say that's the big differences. Now, back to what I was saying with the Libertarians, the cult of personality doesn't exist in the Libertarians. It doesn't. We're a party not much different to your LNP and your ALPs, because you'll have key figures that'll come and they'll go, but the party will remain.
Right.
And they went through a naming convention between the last federal election to this one, because they wanted to really hone into the fact that they had a core ideological difference, was that we saw the big parties essentially, especially through COVID, strip people's rights from them. Like we had a couple of years of the tail end of the last Scott Morrison era, and then we had the halfway COVID with ALP, and both parties decided that they wanted to clamp down on individual rights, especially when you went out under Victoria. So Dan Andrews was like, yes, I'm going to use this as a use to go for the police state and clamp down on people objecting to the COVID lockdowns. We saw it in, I think, Mark McGowan over in WA did that too, and now they're doing it really badly against all the gun owners over in WA. We're going to strip people's gun rights. It's basically a removal of individual rights, and the libertarians don't support government taking away your rights to operate a business, free speech, marry who you want, travel where you want to go. The COVID lockdowns was my last straw with the CLP, because this is where it came for me, was that I was with the CLP, I was the deputy chairperson of the CLP, and when Hugh Heggie, who was the Chief Health Officer for the ALP government of Darwin or Northern Territory, said we're going to do lockdowns and mandates and all this and forced vaccines. And the opposition leader, who is Leah Finocchiaro, who is now the Chief Minister, when we were in meetings, said we're going to abide by the Chief Health Officer's recommendations in regards to vaccines, lockdowns, mandates, police enforcement, all that shit. I basically said, where is your values that's replicated in the policies of the party, whereas individual rights, where is that for you? And she basically told me to shut up. And I basically said, well, you can stick your party and your policies up your backside, because this CLP has betrayed its values. You've betrayed your values. And I can't believe you're the representative member for the CLP. How absolutely, utterly disgraceful. I handed in my resignation that week.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Because
of the breach of...
in every way, I felt that the CLP, the higher ups, the MLAs, the Leah Finocchiaro, and all the way down, the Jared Maley, all the executives, the members of the Legislative Assembly, and some of the members of the Executive Committee, who were all on board with the ALP's lockdowns, I found absolutely disgusting to my core. It sickened me. And I basically said, you guys are full of shit, because you go out there and you preach a message, but behind closed doors, you're fucking hypocrites. And I hated it. I told them they could stick it up their backside. When I left, I wasn't the only one. From the conversations I had with the CLP members, about a third of the members left after I did.
Wow.
Because I basically blew the lid on the whole lot. I said, you guys are disgusting. I wasn't the only one. There were other people who were former MLAs who left the party too. Life members left.
We've had so much come out subsequent, which is brilliant, that exposing it, like, it really wasn't the issue that, and they were sort of putting it on science, but it was the premiers made the choice
to
lock everything down. It wasn't necessary. They would, whether it was fear or control or obviously something of both. Like, why would you?
It was the same thing. So Barnaby Joyce flew up to Darwin, Scott Morrison flew up to Darwin. I had conversations with both of them, and I had a very heated, almost physical altercation with Scott Morrison when he was the Prime Minister, because of his no position in regards to essentially the federal government has the right to overrule states' decision making in regards to especially national health, lockdowns, border controls, all that stuff. And Scott Morrison,
if it wasn't an Ebola outbreak, like, let's say, that, and the way it was being talked about, you're like, oh man, is this like the Ebola virus? Like at the start, but it wasn't.
No,
we know, but now that we know that they knew that it wasn't that bad, like.
Yep. So, I think was it when Barnaby Joyce was not Deputy Prime Minister. I think it was Michael McCormick. I believe he was the.
Yeah.
I believe he was the. So I had a conversation with him, and he was more understanding of my position. This is in 2020 about the lockdowns that were happening around the country, and he was more sensitive to it. But Barnaby Joyce didn't want to have anything to do with it. He was on board with the government's messaging about not taking a position against states doing what they wanted to do, and I thought it was ridiculous, because my argument was our core values are individual liberty. This is the LNP. This is what they're based on, individualism. And I said, you're standing by and letting these, basically, I felt ALP Marxists in Victoria and WA and others, to basically come in and strip people of their rights. You guys are hypocritical idiots. And time will show that you are the worst of the worst. And then where we get to the end of it, now we know what the truth around COVID is, and we know that the vaccines didn't prevent anything, and the lockdowns caused more harm than good. Now we know that their hypocrisy and not taking a position should have basically lost them the election, in my opinion. And I think good riddance, because Scott Morrison was a terrible Prime Minister. I think he was shit. I think Turnbull was also shit. He was a terrible fucking prick. And Albanese is no better. I think they're all terrible. I wish they all go away.
Yeah, well, you heard it here on the Business Advice podcast.
Well, look, they're not serving Australia's interests. They're serving themselves, and they're serving their special interest
And I
groups.
guess this is something I appreciate from the minor parties, is that they're able to expose the duopoly. So there's kind of a between the LNP and ALP. I've seen it on so many issues from local government up to federal, where they're like if they don't challenge each other, then they just go quiet, and the only way it gets out is if one of the smaller parties, someone speaks up from them, and it gets in the media.
Or you'll get a whistleblower, and unfortunately,
but it doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't.
Whistleblowers, it does happen, but it's rare.
But it's the problem is that the risk of being destroyed. See, the problem is if you're a whistleblower, if you speak about things that goes on behind closed doors, whether it's in your local parliament or Canberra or wherever, the risk of being destroyed is too great. Too much people have got too much to lose. And I think this is why you got certain elements in Australia and overseas trying to say, we want to remove money out of politics, we want to do this, we want to do that. I kind of agree with it, because unfortunately the nepotism, the narcissism, the money and the control and the drive. See, Malcolm Turnbull is a good example. He was rich before he entered politics, well and truly rich. And rather than earn the right to be Prime Minister, because he didn't really earn it, he didn't win the hearts and minds of the people. He kind of played off and bought enough people's support in Parliament to essentially jockey himself into position to be the next Prime Minister and stabbing the other guy in the back. That's what he did. And when he became Prime Minister, he just wanted it to look good and to have power. Besides, he doesn't do it for personal wealth because he was already wealthy. And was he a good Prime Minister? No, he was a shit Prime Minister. He was a terrible Prime Minister. He did nothing. But he flew around the country, got to meet everybody as Prime Minister of Australia. Unfortunately, that is not a net good for Australians. We need people in politics that are their representative of the people to be a net good. And unfortunately, and the Libertarians' view on this is that most government is inefficient, useless, doesn't serve positive good. Therefore, it should go away. And the reason why you'll see people like Libertarians and others, Jared Rennick and others, who will come forward and speak about the nonsense that goes on is because, fortunately, the Australian population has listened just enough to get them over the line to send them to the halls to blow the whistle on this nonsense. But unfortunately, the education of Australians about politics or who to vote for is widely controlled by the media, because they do not, like the ABC is a good example, but most of the media do not want to see the minorities in any controlling the levers of parliament. They do not want that, because to them it's a recipe for chaos. But I think a little chaos is good in this sense, because
we don't even know the definition of the words to have a meaningful conversation.
Correct.
And then if you type some of the words we've discussed tonight, if you type them into social media, you'll
have an inverted meaning.
Yep. Or inverted. Or it's both, or censored.
Well, the thing is, I know what you're talking about, like the word, like words like fascism. The problem is when you go back and you look at the history of fascism, it had changed its meaning, changed its position on the left-right scale following World War II. Because the problem was, during and after World War II, essentially all the bad shit was coming from the left side of politics. It was all the bad shit. And the thing is, when you look at the history of America, for example, the Democrats were the founding party of the KKK. So you had, not only did you have the KKK, all the hardcore racists in America were all Southern Democrats, because the Democrats were the Confederates, and the Confederates basically were pro-slavery, sure, and the Republicans were the anti-slavery movement. Yep. So you had that, and then you had the communism, leftist side of communism in Europe starting, and World War II kicked off, and 7 million people got killed in concentration camps. And
I guess the counter argument is the Democrats were for the workers, and there was an issue 100 years ago where,
sure,
where they were benefiting the proletariat. And so there's, I mean, I know that's like, I mean, today that's different,
Yeah.
but the workers' rights, and then my understanding is that's where Democrats were considered the workers' party and for the poor man, and then whether that's actually true, but that was definitely how they marketed themselves.
Kind of. There's lots of things that happened, but essentially, you had following World War II, you had a pretty serious slump on the left, where a lot of evil shit in the world had come from big governments and governments that had run amok. That came from the left side of politics.
Yeah.
It didn't exist on the right side of politics. So, following World War II, and the thing is, you look at the institutions, the educational institutions of America, or the Hollywood of America. A lot of the Hollywood types, the writers, the musicians, were very left-leaning. They had social, Marxist, communist, personal views. And because these people were heads of institutions, heads of galleries, musician, theatre, the arts, so on and so forth, they wrote books. They educated others, but they also educated others into their way of thinking.
And then they were liberal.
They were
so progressive liberal,
very progressive.
And then they've taken the word liberal,
yes,
and they've co-opted that, and
correct.
Now it actually comes. They progress. Liberal is now a synonym.
Liberal is now progressive, where it wasn't ever the case.
Yeah.
So then you look at the history of like the McCarthy era. The McCarthyism that happened in America was essentially a Republican, I believe he was a senator, went after communists in America because they were worried about communism and the rise of communism in America. Now, so what happened was the authors of these books, the leaders of academic institutions, educational institutions, wrote books, and they needed basically a boogeyman, a bad guy on the right to punish, to beat up on, to target. So what they did was they wrote that fascism, because of its racist underpinnings, was a right-wing ideology. And that's become the narrative of today. The truth is that the father of fascism, Giovanni Gentile, he was a leftist. He was a hardcore leftist. Unfortunately, the academics in America who've set the standard for the knowledge base have flipped what fascism is, and they've made it a right-wing philosophy. It's not. And unfortunately, because of that, this is why you can have Marxists on the left call themselves anti-fascist and then say that Trump or Elon Musk, because they're on the right side of politics, even though they're kind of more middle of the road, but because they're more right than I am, they must be a fascist.
Yep.
It's not the case. Unfortunately, the problem is that you've had Marxists and communists run the educational institutions of America, which have set the vocabulary of the national conversation around the differences between right and left. And they've said that fascism is on the right and communism on the left. It's not the case. It is a farce. It is a lie. It is a fantasy that has been perpetrated for way too long. But and the thing is, it's kind of weird because I've heard other people talk about the horseshoe and the fact that as the further left you go and the further right you go, they sort of come round. It's nonsense because the reality is if you want to look at if you want to look at Hollywood style movies as an example, you can look at on the far right, if you want to look at like movies like Aliens, where you've got the Tyrell Corporation, there is no government. The corporation, the Tyrell Corporation or Blade Runner is another example, the big business monopoly, the super monopoly runs the world. And that's as far right as you can go because essentially government doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. Police are employed by, the military is private. The police are private. All economics goes through the corporate sectors. There's no government. That's a fantasy. Now, if somebody can tell me of a country on Earth today, 2025, where a hardcore right-leaning society exists, where a single capitalist corporate entity runs the entire country, I would love to see it because it is fantasy. It is fantasy. It's never existed because governments will always exist, because the governments need to exist, and because governments need to exist, you'll never see, and this is why I'm saying when I see terms like far right does not exist. It is fantasy. It is a straw man that has been built by the left to beat up the right. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
But there is far left, and far left is communism, and all your Marxist ideologies, including fascism, which does exist, which is on the left, it's just a different side of the left.
Yeah. An
Okay,
iteration. And
it's
big
a,
governments,
it's a different.
small government. Like that's kind of the there's that quadrant like where
That's not.
and it's slightly better because it gives you, but it's still it's just a silly way of thinking of things.
Well,
Use
it's
some
kind of it's
geometry to explain something that is multifaceted. Like there's just
yeah, it takes away nuance and interpretation and boils it down to sort of these key
classical and
metrics, which are not true.
yeah,
Because every society is different, and the thing is, like, as I said, with your right left dichotomy, right believes in small governments. The further right you go, the closest thing in the literary space is sort of like your Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand hated communism. She hated it. She talked about how private sector was the way forward and government was evil, and the further away you can go from government, the better it is for society. It's a net positive.
I used to love her books. Atlas Shrugged, I think it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
And The Fountainhead. So books like Atlas Shrugged are a perfect example where government gets out of control. That's a perfect example. Now, we've seen what governments can do when they take control and run amok. We've seen it. We saw it in Soviet Russia. We saw it in communist China. We saw it in Cuba. We saw it in North Korea. Every time communism has flourished, or fascism, because it's also on the left, whenever that style of politics where the government gets big and out of control, what happens is people die. Wars start, people die, unrest, poverty.
Yeah.
And as Margaret Thatcher famously said, you can only spend so much of other people's money before you run out. And that's communism to its core. It happens across the board. On the other side, government is small. It can't spend taxpayer money as much as you want it to. They don't have the power to do it.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's the best way forward. If you go down towards smaller government spends less money on taxes or taxpayer money. People keep more of their money and they can spend more of their own money how they see fit. Like, I find that I spend my money better than the government spends my money. All right. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that unless you're a drug user or some sort of hardcore fiend, like porn fiend, or you need to go see the strippers or the prostitutes every day, unless you're some sort of addict of some description, generally most people will spend their money better than the government will spend it for them.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you hear these programs that the government starts and stops and can't get off the ground, and you go, where did that $3 billion go? And the government goes, I don't know.
Yeah. Literally can't answer.
They can't answer, and it is just absolutely nonsense. Like,
There's no need for it.
well, okay, like a good example is foreign aid. Okay, Australia spends how much in foreign aid? I think the last time I looked at it, it was about $40 billion a year in foreign aid. We spend foreign aid on other countries. Now, there's geopolitical reasons why we spend foreign aid. I get it. But there's also a lot of money that goes into foreign aid where it's like, why do we give money to this place? Why? Why do we send money to Ukraine? It's not our business. Or why are we even involved in what's going on in Ukraine? Oh, for human rights. Okay.
Yeah,
Why is it Australia's business?
or the Houthis or there's so many other conflicts. Yeah, it's
Like
how do we? It's just not our. It's not our business. I guess
it's not our business.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound like we're isolationists, but the thing is, we're a very, very small economy in a big landmass. 27 million people. Like, there are islands of Indonesia that are bigger than us. It's kind of ridiculous. We're a very small economy. Yet I feel like every time a prime minister gets into office, he feels like he needs to make a statement or a place and make our mark in the world. It's kind of weird. There are lots of problems that Australia has, but they're more concerned about what other countries are doing than what's happening here domestically. This is why we have unemployment problems. We've got a drug problem. We've got healthcare crisis. We've got a housing shortage. Like, we're willing to spend $3 billion in Ukraine or $10 billion in Ukraine, but we can't spend $100 million direct funding engaging contractors to build homes in Australia.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was Albanese said he spent $3 billion on housing in Australia, and it was something like, what was it, 100,000 homes, and it was like, when you do the costings, it's like, so each home cost like $3 million, something ridiculous like that. I'm like, okay, that doesn't make sense.
It just doesn't. Hey, it just doesn't.
So
And it doesn't need, so there are viable options for Australians that we need to start considering.
I just think that the waste, the fraud, and the abuse that's going on in Australian politics is ridiculous. It's funny. I go back 10 years. There was a investigation that was done by Monash, Monash, and I think it was SBS and another program. I have to go look it up. And it talks about plutocracy in this country. Now, plutocracy is essentially how people become wealthy in this country. Now, to give you an example, in the United States, people who are millionaires, people who become wealthy on the backs of invention, productivity, creativity, versus those who make their money directly connected to government. So you've got
Yep.
the structures of I make money because I produce something, or
Yep.
I build something, or I make something cool,
Yep.
versus I make my money because I'm in government or I'm connected to government.
Sure.
Okay. In America, less than 1% of millionaires make their money by direct or indirect connections to government. Okay. Now, how much do you think? So 99+% in America make their money, their wealth, millions, through being industrious. That's in America. What do you think the rate is in Australia?
No idea.
So if I'm a millionaire in Australia, what do you think the likelihood, what's the percentage of millionaires in Australia that have made their money through political connections? What do you think?
No idea.
20%?
Really?
No, would you say it's 20%?
Maybe. I don't know.
It's nearly 85%.
Oh.
Colombia. So Colombia or Venezuela or one of the other developing nations, really fraudulent, corrupt countries, Australia's on par with.
Wow.
It's like 85 or 86% of millionaires in this country, millionaires and billionaires, who've made their money, their wealth, through direct or indirect connections to the government.
Wow.
Plutocracy. Massive, massive, massive levels of plutocracy in this country. And you compare it to America, and it's less than 1%.
Wow.
And then you go, well, people say America's corrupt. Well, no, Australia's more corrupt by a lot. People who make wealth in this country, and you look at the people who really make their money, it's like superannuation trusts or insurance companies or land developers. Those are the big ones, okay? They make their money because they got friends, family, relatives, buddies in government to give them lucrative land deals or to allow them to set up with lucrative trusts, lucrative deals, whatever, and they make their money that way. 86% or something ridiculous of millionaires in this country are made because of direct government connections.
That's astounding.
And the libertarians would like to see that end because, unfortunately, if you go into government, the way it's viewed, and this is why there are protections. This is why the upper levels of the ruling class of the government of Australia protect what they have because they don't want other people sort of coming in and disrupting it because it is a gravy train. It is a never-ending gravy train of the ruling class in Australia. So essentially, I leave the government, I go into a very, very wealthy private sector, which then funds my family or my friends or my relatives to go back into government to rule Australia. And it becomes this endless cycle of being ruled by the very, very upper class through the government of Australia. It was never the case, but it has become the case. Because, and this is what I said before about having a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights would strip a lot of the powers that be away from the government. And this is why, as I said, the ALP and the Liberal National want the two-party system in place because it keeps them in control and it keeps the levers within their clutches. As soon as you start separating, splitting it out, putting in bills of rights to protect individual rights, make sure that the transparency and accountability in government is there, it takes away their power, it takes away the money, it takes away all of the millions and billions of dollars that these people can make and fund forever. It is core corruption. It has been going on for decades. Most Australians don't have a freaking clue about it. And when you tell people about it, if you're in party politics, you're castigated because you're essentially the siren. You're making waves, or you're rocking the boat, and they hate it. But look, the CLP was a good example. So like, the former leaders of the CLP in the Northern Territory, who ran the territory for 30 years before they lost in the 2000s to the first ALP government in the Northern Territory. So from independent governments in like 77, 78 to 2001, the CLP ran the show in the Territory. Now, the secretaries of the ministers that ran the Territory became, guess what, wealthy landowners. Why? Well, because of favourable deals by their bosses, who were the ministers of the party. So they got favourable deals, they got rezoned land that was gifted to them, essentially, or they were preferenced because of backroom deals, closed party room stuff. So their secretaries, who now run the party, made their wealth by favourable deals that the members of the Legislative Assembly gave to them. You couldn't see a more corrupt outcome for party politics. But the ALP did the same thing when they got in charge. When the ALP ran the show for years, they curried favour with their members and they gave them wealthy this and wealthy that, and they signed them up to government contracts. And national party politics across the scale, LNP, national, ALP, national, they all do it. It's like, and they create an industry of money that cycles through taxpayer, that keeps the money centralised away from people outside. And this is why when you go along to party meetings, or when you join a party like the AOP or the LNP, there's all these barriers to get in the door. And then to rise the ranks of the executive committees, the policy committees, all of that stuff, or to get into the inner circles, there's all these mechanisms, checks and balances to make sure that you're a party faithful. You got to prove yourself. You got to shake the right hands and kiss the right baby, or suck up to the right person to get in, because they got to make sure you're not somebody who's going to sell them out. Now, for me, I was a party faithful in the sense that I had a shared value system that aligned with that party, but I've always been one to call out corruption when I see it. And unfortunately, for me and others like me, we were always sort of kept a little bit at arm's length, because it was dangerous for us. Because if we ever got into a key position of power structurally, we wouldn't shy away from blowing the whistle and throwing our other members of the Legislative Assembly under the bus for their actions, or their family members, or their friends. We weren't afraid of doing that, and when we did, we were usually cast aside. And this is why you'll have dissidents from the LNP break away, like the Corey Bernardis and others, because they see this shit all the time. It never goes away.
Yeah.
And they get sick of it. Because all they see is they see an erosion of trust with the public, because the public go, you promised to do this or this, and they see the corruption that goes on and they go, yuck. They do not want to sell their souls to Satan to maintain power at all costs. So they blow the whistle, and then they get castigated, they get thrown out by their own parties. Happens all the time.
Yeah. Wow.
But the corruption that happens in this country at the political level is rife. It's incestuous, it's evil, and it does not serve the common good.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, most people, even in independent politics, people who even run for Senate like myself, won't talk about it, because the fear is that this will have blowback. Personally, I don't care. I've never cared, because for me, I've always believed, without barrier, I believe that it is important that the population is informed. We have to be accountable to the population, and we have to be truthful. Unfortunately, this is not shared by 99% of politicians. They do not want to show the truth, because it's a disaster. They want to paint this pretty picture. I don't believe in pretty pictures. I think we need to show the unadulterated dirt that happens in Canberra. It is disgusting what happens there.
Yeah. So for anyone who is listening to this, who they feel that the Libertarian Party fits their values and they'd like to see influence or in Parliament, how do they vote Libertarian?
Well, essentially, top or bottom of the ticket, it's basically put one, Libertarian. Pick the minor parties like your One Nations and your I guess your Trumpet of Patriots, I guess, depending on where they're located, and essentially put your Teals and your Greens dead last. ALP and LNP, like depending on where your personal position is, I would definitely preference LNP over ALP. That's just
Sure.
like, given the choice between Dutton or Albanese, I much prefer Dutton over Albanese, because at least some of the policies he pushes is more in line with I support. I met Dutton years ago, and I actually didn't mind him so much, but
Yeah.
I much prefer him over Albanese.
Sure. Yeah.
But
the
essentially,
I had with him with community matters was exceptional.
he comes as a police officer. He knows what it's like for victims of crime. That's a big thing. It's one thing to be a politician for your whole life and say, "Oh yeah, victims of crime. I know exactly what that looks like," versus a police officer
Yeah.
who's attended to domestic violence and seen a woman raped by her spouse and beaten to death or beaten half to death, and it's like, well, no, I actually know what it looks like.
Yeah.
Like, I'm the son of a cop. I grew up in community. I knew what domestic violence looks like. I knew what child molestation looks like. It's horrible.
Yeah.
And party politics, it's the same. You can ferment, you can draft, write, and carry forward bills that you know will have a substantive effect on the problem that you want to address, rather than some sort of passing understanding of, yeah, maybe I kind of know. No, unfortunately, that's what Albanese is. He's all fluff and no substance, all smoke and no substance. Dutton actually has a cleaner understanding of what it means, especially around crime. In regards to his position on nuclear, I support nuclear. I think a lot of libertarians do, because the science is in nuclear is way better and way cheaper than the green energy scam. And the climate science nonsense is just nonsense. I don't know how many libertarians are going to come forward and say that. I don't know a lot of them if they're very knowledgeable about it. That's the key thing. Because running any sort of big campaign policy, you can spend 50 hours talking about all the different policies. It's ridiculous.
Sure.
But essentially, libertarians, top of the ticket, 1, 2, wherever you find them, Senate or House. The NT's only running Senate. It's not running any House of Representatives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's mostly because the Libertarian Party doesn't have a state or territory party in existence right now. Following this federal election, we're going to build a party branch in the Northern Territory for Libertarians for the Northern Territory, because Queensland's got one, New South Wales has got one, but we're still in the works.
Okay.
Well, that's the big one, I think.
No, that's great. And for you, like social media, where can if anyone's watching this, they want to?
Oh, they can Jed Hansen, Libertarian. They can just Google me on. They can find me on Facebook. But just find me on Facebook. And my contact details are listed there as well. Libertarian Party of Australia. Google us. Find us there too. Yeah. Look, and in regards to the public, I guess our public policy précis. I know that the policy précis for the Liberal Democrats was up for a long time. They redesigned the website. I know that it's something that's going to happen or has happened. I just don't know how much public is there. But for example, just as a hot take for cost of living and so on and so forth, we want to cut the excise entirely for fuel. That's a good example. We just want to get rid of it because we don't, like, GST was brought in to get rid of all of the extraneous costs for taxation. Stamp duty, gone, see you later, goodbye. Things like, what else did I have? There was heaps. We want to change the federal income tax down. We want to get rid of stamp duty. Excise is gone. How many others? Heaps. We essentially Australia would negotiate better trade deals with the Yanks. We want Australians to produce in this country rather than import everything from China. It's not in our national interest. Pro-nuclear, the green energy stuff needs to go away. All of the subsidies around solar, wind needs to go away as well. It doesn't suit our national interest. We would love to see more natural gas power stations go up as an interim, because it's a good benchmark as an interim between that and nuclear. When nuclear, hopefully the moratorium is gone away. We want to see legitimate, rational immigration to fill needed jobs in this country, rather than flooding it with people who've got no skills or don't add to the makeup of Australia. Like, we have a problem in our healthcare system. We don't have enough doctors and nurses. So we want to see a much more straightforward approach to dealing with immigration. And there's a host of other ones.
Sure.
A host of others.
We've covered a lot tonight.
And I'm always happy to answer more questions, and I think a lot of libertarians are. But yeah, look, and I guess the future for us would be building more of a base of people, cementing a lot of our policies. Like ideally, we want to see core investment in infrastructure in this country, whereby it goes to baseload power. We see a revitalisation of the farming sector, because we feel the farming sector has been kneecapped by government legislation for decades, especially around the green energy nonsense and all the climate agenda crap, because we feel like farmers have been hurt by this. We also feel that farmers have been hurt by the fact that we have to sell goods overseas at a bargain basement price to meet certain trade obligations with China, for example. So I'll say this, and this will be sort of one of the last things I say. Like natural gas, we sell natural gas overseas. 90% of our natural gas is sold overseas. Okay, we keep about 10% of it roughly here in Australia. There's no real Federal Reserve, and the amount of fuel and gas we keep as a national like a disaster is about 6 days worth of backup. That's how much we've got. America keeps hundreds of days of backup, and they're a much bigger economy. We should at least have 30 days of backup. We've got 6. It's ridiculous. We're sorely behind. Now, we sell 90% of our gas overseas. All right, 36% of it go to China. Now, to give you an example, the cost of a barrel of gas, liquid natural petroleum, sells on the national price of about 65 US a barrel, roughly. Okay, that's about the market rate. Kevin Rudd signed a deal, I think for 10 or 15 years or 20 years, might be longer, might even be 30 years, to sell natural gas to China for $21 a barrel. That's a third of what the market price is right now. 21 US a barrel. So we sell 36% roughly of our natural gas to China under the China Free Trade Agreement, which he signed, for a third of market price right now. And it's a fixed price. So regardless of the market going up or down, we sell $21 a barrel to China. Bargain basement. It's cheaper than cheap. All right. Now here's the funny thing: is when you look at Saudi Arabia, when you look at Oman, when you look at Jordan, when you look at Egypt, when you look at any of those countries, Libya, who harvest oil, natural gas, and they sell it on the market prices. When market prices go up, guess what? Everything in their country becomes cheaper. And people who live in those countries pay no income tax, no business tax. So, and goods and services get cheaper when oil prices increase for those countries that export oil. When oil prices go up globally, what happens is cost of living increases in this country. Because guess what? 90% of our oil is sold at a bargain basement price. Yeah. All right. It is the most retarded, ridiculous, knee-cutting circle jerk by government I've ever seen. If we sold it even at a 10% discount to OPEC's standard pricing, Australian gas producers would make a truckload. They would sell domestically for nothing because they'd be flushed with cash from China. And the funny thing is, and this is the thing that I laugh the most at, Australia produces some of the highest quality natural gas, petroleum anywhere on earth. We sell the best of the best to China for cheap. They can go to terrible producing countries like the East African nations. They can get tar, pollutant crap, and they still pay more than they pay here. That's how ridiculous it is. Because of the China Free Trade Agreements and other things that they signed, governments signed these things to China to appease the Chinese neighbors. Now, I'm not saying I'm anti-China. I'm saying that the government has come by and said, here's the resources of this country. We're going to sell it for cheap.
Yeah.
And Australian taxpayer be damned. So if they were marketed and negotiated at a fair market rate, which would benefit Australians, you would need no subsidies in oil and gas, because essentially oil and gas is subsidised in this country. Fuel prices are obscene, and we pay taxes and excise on them to fund the subsidies. If natural gas was sold at a standard rate or a slightly discounted rate, not the 66% off, the cost of filling up your car would only cost like 90 cents a litre or 60 cents a litre. Cost of power in your home, natural gas, coal, whatever, would also be dirt cheap. It wouldn't be one of the highest in the world. Okay, so the libertarians want to scrap a lot of these trade deals that do not serve the Australian interest. We would gut them entirely. They would be gone. We would renegotiate a very hard line with our trading neighbours like China. We would basically say, hey, look, if you don't want to buy the best product on planet Earth for a fair price, tough bickies. Who cares? Piss off. And it's not that we want to have animus towards China. We want to have fair, equitable trading partners, but we want respect as well. And we feel like a lot of countries take advantage of Australia's good nature and goodwill, and they sign these bogus agreements that do not benefit our national interest.
Yeah.
And Australian taxpayers pay the price for this. They pay the price every time they go and fill up their car or pay for the milk and bread and vegetables and meat. Every time we pay some of the highest prices to live in this country, and the government stings us every time, and it needs to end because Australia is going broke under these governments, and more Australians are homeless now than they've ever been. More Australians are more uneducated. Our healthcare is worsening because of bad government policies, bad agreements, bad trade deals. We have got countries that actually want us to succeed, like America would love Australia to be more successful. China doesn't care. They don't care about our national. They want us to see us broken, impoverished, because they'll just come and buy us up.
Yeah,
that's their national credo. They'll just buy us up. They bought up countries in Africa. They bought up countries in Southeast Asia. They don't care about equitable trading partners. They just want to see us broken, impoverished, and living off Chinese produce. America wants to see an equitable trading partner and a strong partner and ally in Australia. So we're getting robbed by the bureaucrats in Canberra who don't care. And they're making horrible trade deals. That needs to go. And the libertarians don't support this nonsense. We want to have equitable trade in the world, and we want to make sure that Australians are rich and prosperous and strong. Their kids go to educations that they're proud of. Their kids come out with good educations, good degrees, good qualifications, trade certificates. People in this country have homes. They have places to go. They can travel freely. They're respected abroad. And unfortunately, the governments of Australia have not granted that. They have basically undermined everything Australia stands for. We're not the greatest country that we should be. We're not the blue check mark, the Aussie spirit that Australia had 100 years ago. It doesn't exist anymore because it's been undermined by the disease that's of Canberra. They've destroyed Australian integrity. And I think the Libertarians are one of the only few parties, Jared Rennick and others, who actually care about the grassroots of Australia, the core of Australian identity. The major parties do not give a shit.
Well, Australia's got an opportunity to vote soon. So thanks so much, Jed, tonight. It's covered so many interesting, colourful topics, and you've spoken your mind very clearly and articulately. So hopefully we don't get cancelled.
I don't care. I think, like, for me, it's partly passion and mostly frustration.
But it's legitimate and it's fair, and you're absolutely right. So, no, I love it, man. Thanks so much for sharing this. And so we'll put the links below, and let's stay in touch. And you're in the community now, so we'll put all the links up so people can reach out and follow you and see your journey. So, thanks again, Jed.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Business Advice Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.